Okay, so this is Jason with Christianity and Perennialism, and I'm here with Charles Upton and the lovely Mrs. Upton, who agreed to meet with me. I'm very thankful for them. And we're here in beautiful downtown Kentucky in the Central Library, and I thought...
Lexington, Kentucky.
Lexington, Kentucky.
Louisville is more of an old, bricky Rust Belt eastern city, yeah. Whereas Lexington is, it's got Chamber of Commerce, it's got an attractive old town that will give you the flavor of, here's the house where Lincoln's wife grew up, and here's the Indian restaurant that used to be student housing for Transylvania University, where Jefferson Davis was, a student at one point, and it's very historic.
And speaking of Kentucky, also, I had already heard your name even before I knew anything about perennialism, and before I had known you were involved in perennialism. But I knew your name, and I knew you were connected with the counterculture in the 60s.
Yeah.
And I always connected, in my mind, I connected you with California.
Well, yeah, and California was great until we used it up, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
So, are you also a California native?
No, I'm a native of Kentucky.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's why I'm here now. So.
Oh, okay. So I was wondering how you wound up back in
Eastern Kentucky.
I see.
She's not a laid back, aristocratic Southern belle in a planter class that would more likely to be Confederate. But she's one of these, hillbilly freeholders from the hills that might well be a Unionist.
Good Lord. I like the Confederacy, actually.
You do?
Yes, I do.
So you wound up from California. And what year did you wind up going from California to Kentucky?
2004.
Oh, okay. So relatively recent. Yeah. And whereabouts in California were you?
Marin County, California.
Oh, gorgeous area. Yeah.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
And you have. We were. What I say. I don't know about you because you didn't grow up there, but I was undergoing a static culture shock, whereas the whole visual picture of Marin County was pretty much the same, beautiful, and hills and ocean and forest and laid back suburbs, whereas what was really going on was a lot harder and more painful, and there was a dissonance.
Mm-hmm.
So
the first thing I wanted to talk about today was you mentioned, so you have a new book that it's already set to be published. Has it been decided?
Well, it's pretty set. We haven't signed a contract yet, but the people at Divan Ishq Publications, which is a project of the Seda Zainab Library, and I still have to learn more about these people. It's run by women. They seem more Shia than not.
Okay.
They're not Iranians. I don't know. I have to find out more about them, but they seem. I mean, she seems to want. She wishes she could take over my whole list. And so that's nice. And my book on it's not exactly on Schuon, but it's a funny hybrid book because it's called The Way Forward for Perennialism After the Antinomianism of Frithjof Schuon, which is, there's a little bit tension between those two ideas, but they both need to be in there.
And this term antinomianism, it doesn't quite mean, it's not syncretism or anything like this. It's more of like a...
Well, antinomianism means you're against, or at least beyond, the idea of sacred law. Sacred law does not apply to the Gnostics, to the pneumatics, to the Batinis, which now in terms of Sufism, now Frithjof Schuon was, I will have to say, nominally a Sufi. He's not a lot like most Sufis, but that's, he started a Sufi order called the Maryamiyya Tariqa, which was originally called the Maryamiyya Shadili Tariqa, because his initiation came from Sheikh Ahmed al-Alawi, who was of the Shadili lineage, and then, the sheikhs that came after him became the Alawiya.
Did this have something to do with his stay in Algeria? Or?
Yeah, that was in Algeria,
Okay.
in Mostaganem,
Okay.
Algeria. He didn't stay for very long, but he got initiated, and then he came to the West and, set up shop on his own, and later they dropped the Shadili title. It just became the Maryamiya Tarika because, to a certain degree, it was based on visions he had had of the Virgin Mary. So it was very, individualistic, eccentric kind of Tarika. And so if you're an antinomian Sufi, and most Sufis are not antinomians, most Sufis traditionally have said Sufism first has to be part of Islam, which, there's...
Didn't Schuon sort of say that or try to pretend to
Well,
say
a lot of people said that who didn't really live that way. Dr. Javad Nurbaksh said that in all his books, who was the sheikh of the Nimatulahi order that we were with. Jenny was with it briefly. I was with it for 20 years until he passed away in 2006. And that's what all his books said, but that isn't really what they were doing. So the idea, but most Sufis will say, it's normative to follow Sharia. Sharia, because Allah is both the inner and the outer. So, that you follow the outer form, but yet there's an inner meaning to that form, which by and large the Sufis concentrate upon. And, that's the mystical or the path of mystical path or the path of tasawwuf. But then there have always been antinomians who say, well, if you're on the inner path, which so far supersedes, the outer path of Islam or the outer path of any religion, the law and sometimes even the morality does not apply to you because you're beyond all that. And this has always been a problematic response to a sense of an inner or higher truth. But, in certain circumstances, it seems to have its function. When the outer version of the religion becomes petrified, then it seems like always somebody pops up and breaks all the norms and loosens things up a bit so things aren't so, so frozen. But it's always created problems at the same time. Mm-hmm. So, like Al-Hallaj in Sufism is perhaps the best known antinomian Sufi, who at one point in an ecstatic state said, Ana al-Haq, I am the truth, which means essentially, I am God. Well, that didn't go over too well with the exoteric Muslim authorities. They said, well, that's blasphemy, which of course, taken in a certain sense it is. Mm-hmm. Jesus did the same thing. Mm-hmm. When he said, before Abraham came to be, I am. And I am was probably Yah, which is the first syllable of the name of God. So, the Pharisees said, wow, they came to stone him and then he somehow got away. But Jesus also said, when people would come to him and say, good master, and he said, why do you call me good? There's no one good but God. And so he would present himself both as a servant, just like anyone else must be a servant of God, if you believe in God. And then on the other hand, he speaks as if he's identified with God. And Al-Hallaj did something similar when he said, Ana al-Haq, which finally got him executed. And, in the history of Sufism, it's an ambiguous thing. You can't, Sufis can't go around all saying they're God because this is not going to have a good effect on the religion and whatever they may mean by it, because it is entirely possible that there was no Mansur Hallaj at that moment, there was only God, and he spoke. He said, I'm God. And then Monsieur Halaj came back and said, what just happened? You know, I mean, this could have been the way it was, but that was not.
So in Schuon's case, I feel like we're, in the perennialist scene, so to speak, I guess you might call it. We're dealing with a situation now where we're still feeling the reverberations of Schuon and his influence.
Yeah.
I mean, and
immense reverberations.
I don't think that will change because he wasn't solely responsible for establishing perennialist thought, but he's certainly indispensable, I think, with respect to it.
He brought perennialism to its greatest, to its pinnacle, to its greatest degree of development. But by the same token, having reached the pinnacle, there was nowhere to go but down. He began, I think, certain elements of self-sabotage. He loosened the whole structure of things. And, in a way, he was the greatest of all of them. In another way, he was the one where the cracks in the perennialist or traditionalist viewpoint and the contradictions began to show themselves. So, a very ambiguous figure, but certainly with an incredible influence. I mean, look at the people he collected around him. Around Schuon collected Titus Burckhardt and Martin Lings and Seder St. Nazare and whoever else, Marco Paulus and Rama Coomaraswamy, and what a group,
Certainly, yeah.
Any one of those would be considered to be a preeminent spiritual writer,
Absolutely, that always amazes me when, for example, I'm also a fan, so to speak, of Jose Nasser.
Yeah.
And for me, I feel like similar to with you, I feel like he's just like a man out of the age. When I hear him speak and I say he doesn't even fit in the time, but to hear the regard with which he speaks of Schuon is pretty incredible. His career is to a large extent, his career in the West is to a large extent based on Schuon.
Yes. Yes. Well, we could talk. We want to talk about. Well, we're talking.
I used to go to Washington. I looked at him as a spiritual director of a kind for a while, and I would go to Washington to visit. That was sometime.
Yeah.
And one of his sayings, one of Jose Nasser's saying is, "Only the absolute is absolute." I say this almost daily. Almost daily I use this.
There's no God but God.
Yeah.
That's what that means.
Right. Or when Christ says, why do you call me good?
Yeah.
Once you see the theme there, it just pops up over and over. Or even when John the Baptist sees Christ, he goes, I must decrease and he must increase. You see this theme recurring over and over again. Yeah. So with respect to Schuon, so as we were speaking before we started filming, it's kind of amazing how controversial even speaking about Schuon has become, and even years and years after his death, it's still incredibly controversial, and people get very, obviously if you bring him up in terms of a regular religious setting at church, people are going to be like, why are you following this guru? He doesn't know anything about Christianity.
Fallen guru,
Right.
Sri Rajneesh, Maharishi Mahashogi, and Frithjof Schuon.
Right, and
you can't really just put him in that category.
Right, and if I were to bring to my church, if I were to bring the collection of his writings on Christianity from that Professor Cutsinger put together, all it would take was one person to Google it and be like, who is this guy he's not even Christian. Why are you following him? But it's a gorgeous collection of writings.
Actually, that book was my idea.
Yeah.
I said to Cutsinger, why don't you just do one on the Christian show?
Oh, okay.
So I think he did. Yeah.
That's
But in the cover.
He did great writings on Christianity. But
Remarkable.
I don't talk about him to people in church. What am I talking about?
Yeah.
What was that other anthology he did of Christian writings, which was amazing?
Oh, the Not of This World, is it?
I think that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not by Schuon. It's his collection of Christian mysticism. I think.
Yeah. And he stole that title from Seraphim Rose, weirdly enough. Seraphim Rose. I mean, in Orthodox circles, Seraphim Rose is considered to be heterodox in a lot of people, which shows spread out at least that far. I'm glad you mentioned Seraphim Rose, because many perennialist traditionalists are fans of Father Seraphim Rose, but even still, he's like that one step where he always, until the end of his life, held René Guénon in high regard, but he also sort of said, well, he had the truth, but he hadn't stumbled upon the full truth, which is orthodoxy. That's a standard that you find when you're in that middle ground between traditionalism and orthodox. Any religion's orthodoxy. Right, and that's what any Christian writer who has any sense of universalism will ultimately say. I mean, even Augustine's, harking back to his earlier Manichaeism, would say, Christianity has always existed, but it only came to be called that after Jesus of Nazareth.
Right.
So that's a kind of something left over from his Manichaean view, but it's not untrue. We could talk about Schuon, but let's put it in the context of Schuon is perennialism. And perennialism is a very hard place to be. People take to it because it seems so true, and it's wonderful. It's got everything you want, supposedly, in being faithful to the various spiritual traditions, not being a liberal, perversion of those traditions.
Mm-hmm. A New Ager, right.
Not being New Age, not being all the other things that you can do that will dilute a real revealed religion, and yet it accepts the reality of more than one revelation, which at one point, if you know enough about what's going on in the world and the history of God's dealings with humanity, you will have to say that, Mm-hmm. And not everybody does, and the people who don't, I don't say they're dishonest, but I'm just saying, really, any tradition that produces saints has got to be doing something right,
Yeah.
And more, that's true of more than one tradition. So, but it seems like, that's beautiful. I could be completely, traditional in one sense, but completely universal in another sense. Everything's cool. But it's not cool, because those two things, until a lot later, there's a deep tension between those two poles, and there always will be. And it is hard to straddle that split, because it's a split. It's like the transcendent unity of religions, which is the main doctrine of perennialism in Schuon's terminology, means that the paths of the different, they say all paths lead to God, mm-hmm. To the same, they're different starting points, but they have the same source and the same goal. Like different paths up a mountain peak may be totally different, but when you get to the peak, it's the same peak. I would accept that, but that it's not easy to be there, because they're only really united in the transcendent dimension. I mean, mm-hmm. Sufi Jalaluddin Rumi, apparently, there's this book of his called Fihi Ma Fihi, which means in it what is in it. And this is his discourses that were recorded, I guess, by his students, and because he had a lot of different students. He had Christian followers as well, as Schuon did have Christian followers. So did Rumi. And Rumi, apparently, someone came to Rumi and said, "Well, why can't we? If the truth is universal, why can't we have a universal religion? Because." That would bring peace between people of faith, and Why not? You have a very universal standpoint on one level. Why do we just have to say Islam is the true religion, whatever the other? And he said, look, this is not possible in this world. The religions cannot be united in this world. There's always been conflict between religions and even within religions and different sects. That's the way this world is. It's a world of divisions. And because everybody has a different need and a different view, and so don't try to bring the religions into one form, into one system in this world.
Like a Tower of Babel project.
It's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And that was done, why? For an imperialistic purpose. You know, I mean, whoever Nimrod was, whether he was an individual or he represented a regime or, the idea was you bring all the gods together into one pantheon. This is what the Romans did in their imperialism. They would take possession of the gods of their different subject peoples and give them statues in the pantheon in Rome. And there were even some Jews who were about to go for that, or considering maybe we could be. We're not really supposed to make statues of Yahweh because that's pretty pagan. But on the other hand, we want our seat at the table,
Well, the Romans would say that they were validating those traditions.
Yeah, but they were validating.
That's the way
we give our blessing. But hey, who are you to bless a revealed tradition if because your position is power. That's why you're here giving some of the blessing, is because you've conquered us. So you don't really have the ability to bless us. But not and that might have even happened at one point if it weren't for the Jewish revolt, which nipped that in the bud. So the idea is, and then Rumi said, in the next world, these divisions won't exist because everybody will see the one thing. But that's for the next world. That's not for this world. Right. So you're straddling. That more than one of these traditions has deep knowledge and has produced profound saints. And as you get closer to the center of these different traditions, you see very similar doctrines. I mean, like in Hinduism, as the doctrine of the Atman, the true self, deeper than the ego, deeper than the individual self, is the Atman, and which is the universal witness, you could call it. And the Atman is one with Brahman, which is the absolute. And then St. Paul said, "It is not I who live, but Christ lives in me." Oh yeah? And then Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, says, he who knows himself knows his Lord. And I said, well, that's the same self. Or then Meister Eckhart said, my truest I is God. Well, they're talking about the same thing. Wonderful. The closer you get. So why can't we have a unity of religions now? Because all these people are really saying the same thing on that level, pretty much the same thing. But no.
The response that I always give, and it sounds so superficial when I say it, is when people say, well, why, if there is only one truth, then how could there be multiple truths? And my response is, because people are different.
Because people are different.
It's that simple.
And because there is no God but God, and because God is both transcendent and immanent.
And relative, yeah.
Yeah, and the transcendence of God means that only He transcends the multiplicity of the world. And I would say, because God is one, His dimensional manifestation in the various worlds must be multiple. Otherwise, one of those manifestations would be Him. And God would therefore be trapped in the world and trapped in history in one absolute, organization or tradition or thing, which is God, literally. And this denies God's transcendence. God's immanence, the very fact that He is transcendent of all form and all differences, is what allows Him to pervade all forms and all differences because he's not limited. But you need both of those poles. I mean, in the Muslim prayer, you know, you have the opening, you know, the first surah of the Quran where it says, you know, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the beneficent, the merciful, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, you know, you know, praise be to God, Rabbil Alameen, the Lord of the worlds, Maliki Yawmiddin, the owner or the king of the day of judgment. And so in other words, he has these different qualities. You know, he's the Lord of the worlds, he's the one who judges, he's these different things, you know, and he's the one to whom we turn, you know, so we do not go astray, and so we do not become transgressors, and so, you know, he's definitely one thing and not another, you know, and because he exists in relation to his creation. But then the prayer goes on, you know, and it says, you know, he neither begets nor is begotten, and there's nothing to which he can be compared. So you can't, on the other way, compare him to a king or a lord. You know, he's beyond all that, and both of those are necessary.
He can't be shoehorned into any form. I feel like I always think of it in terms of, you know, the form and the formless.
Yeah,
a form is just a limit.
Yeah.
So if we say, and it's something that you can draw a line around, and if we say, when we speak about Christianity, that's something we can draw a line around, because we say this is Christianity, this isn't. So therefore, the absolute is bigger than Christianity.
Yeah.
And yet, paradoxically, the absolute is in Christianity and in Islam.
Yeah, and there are certain forms. See, there are forms which are relatively closed. You know, which you say, well, this is the form. This is, it has its limits, and whatever's within those limits is real, and whatever's outside those limits might as well not exist. But then there are other forms which are open, you know, and so sacred forms are forms that certainly have all those limitations of you know what a form is, which is, as you say, a limitation. And yet there's somewhere in them where there's a door beyond form. Forms that contain a door beyond form are sacred forms. Other forms are just, you know.
Yeah, it reminds me of one of my favorite hymns. Speaking of down south, is Kentucky considered the Bible Belt? Are we in the Bible Belt right now?
This is the northern limit of the South, but it is the South.
Okay.
Them people across the Ohio are totally different people.
So one of my favorite hymns, even though I'm Catholic, but an American hymn was Elvis sang it actually also. He did a version of it where it says, it's so high you can't get over it, so low you can't get under it, so wide you can't get around it, you must go in at the door. And it's showing you right there, and it's such a like a folksy way of saying it.
Well, so and you know, obviously he was quoting the Prophet Muhammad, who said, enter houses by their doors. You know, same thing. Yeah.
Right, but you see this concept. Even the most sort of folksy Christians who are not even part, they're just, I guess, what were they back in those days? Was evangelicism even a thing back then? I don't know, but...
Well, yeah, I mean, more Baptists.
And yet they had this kernel there that put them beyond all the forms, and they're even singing about it in a hymn in their little white church.
Yeah, I mean, we went to, you know, I've been to a lot of funerals of Jenny's family. At you know, old regular Baptist funerals, and just I saw, I don't know, I mean, is that spirituality going to continue? Most of the people in those churches were old, you know, and it may just disappear by attrition. But I was there and I saw it, and definitely, even though I was raised a Catholic, and so I understand what the completeness of, you know, the Christian tradition is, and I also understand something about Eastern Orthodoxy and the Greek fathers and such. So I see all that riches, and you say, well, the Baptists have pared down to almost nothing, and they lost so much the Protestants lost so much in the Reformation. But then you get to the real pious Baptists, and just through that naked piety and belief in Jesus, they can get some pretty high spaces.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've coming from New York City and living in Texas now as I do, I'm for the first time in my life, I'm exposed to the evangelical community. And of course you have the sort of parody that's there with the Israeli flags up and everything and all that stuff. And yet, even still though, you have within it, I found some of the most sincere Christians that I've ever met in my life who live the faith to a degree that I rarely saw up north.
Yeah.
And so this is when I speak to my fellow Catholics at church or anything, and they just totally they make the evangelicals the butt of their jokes, and and yet I've met a few where I say that I don't think that I've met anyone who gets Christianity as much as he does.
Well, what was that Orthodox monastery we went to in West Virginia?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Were they, Antiochians?
Well, what were they? They were Russian, I think.
Oh.
Some Russian.
Yeah, the Russian Orthodox have real piety, for sure. But was that, who were you talking to? Was that the abbot, or was that one of the priests?
I'm not sure.
But he was just talking about, getting along with the Baptists, in the hills.
They have that monastery, but the community below would be all what we call fundamentalist Christians, pretty much.
Yeah, and they would come to him and say, well, you guys, do you believe in Jesus? And they, yes. Well, King James Bible, that's the one we use. And, all right, I guess you're okay. So,
I'm trying to pull up a quote here from Schuon that Professor Cutsinger included in his, I have it saved in my notes somewhere here, where he speaks about the evangelicals and Protestants. And let me see if I can pull it up here, where he says, here we go. And for me, this is one of my favorite quotes by him about Christianity. He says, "For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there I am in the midst of them," Christ said. Among all the possible meanings of this saying, there could be also this one. The first 2 who assemble are Catholicism and Orthodoxy, and the third, which is mentioned apart, is Protestantism. In fact, Christ could have said, where 3 are gathered, thereby placing the 3 confessions on the same level, but he said 2 or 3, which indicates a certain inequality, but always within the framework of religious legitimacy. Inequality as regards completeness or plenitude, but at the same time legitimacy as regards love of Christ and spiritual authenticity, and thus an underlying fraternity despite the differences.
Well, yes. Now that's where Schuon is great. And then you run into once in a while prejudices and irritations which seem to belie everything he would say in a statement like that, and that's because this was a very ambiguous guy. I think that Schuon, he wrote by inspiration, a little bit like a poet will, we were talking about this before on the phone, like a poet will write poems, and he would have a flash and have, like, that was a wonderful perception. But he didn't necessarily refer to that kind of perception when he was saying something else. And he would go somewhere else in his soul, and he would have another set of prejudices. And there's one place where Patrick Laud, in one of his books, one of Schuon's followers, pointed out that Schuon said religion is like a profanation of the divine. And that is not what a traditionalist would say.
Right. I can see where he's coming from, but at the same time, this is not something that you say or should ever say, or even maybe you should correct yourself if you even think it, yes, but...
And in his writing, he goes along, he'll say things, and he's so great at correcting himself in the next paragraph. He goes on and on and on and on. And he goes, and this is, but on the other hand, and sometimes he can really keep it together. Other times he can't.
Right. This reminds me also of, I often think of, this is getting into more of ambiguous stuff, but that originally, some claim that originally humans communicated via telepathy before spoken language. And then spoken language was in a sense a profanation of our silent communication, which as husband and wife know this.
And written language is a further profanation of our
and this is why in Islam especially that it has to be communicated orally, and traditionally the Vedas in Hinduism were passed down orally, because you lose the intonation of the and yet there are certain written languages where you gain a symbolism from them, a visual symbolism, in classical Arabic and classical Chinese.
I just saw a YouTube video recently which claimed that the evidence is that the Egyptian hieroglyphs appeared at one time. They did not evolve from a series
a sort of Cambrian explosion of hieroglyphics.
This is the story in so many traditions that, various human skills were brought by the gods. This is the god that brought agriculture. We had no idea what's going on, but Demeter appeared and said, guess what you can do, and in the Egyptian terms, this would have been Thoth, but who knows what that means historically, but major developments very often come through individuals. That's what prophecy is. A prophet will, something new will come to this person. You could make a visual system which would, you would know what the spoken words were related to those visual symbols, but also they'd give you a direct, visual feeling of what it's talking about. And certainly, Chinese arose, the Chinese pictographs, characters arose from that kind of perception. You have a particular Chinese character, which is a whole meaning there visually at once. Bing, Dao,
and actually, because my background is in Japanese language, and there's something interesting going on with the Japanese language right now, because they have 3 alphabets. They have their Chinese characters, which are essentially which they took from China, and then they have 2 purely phonetic alphabets, which are the equivalent of like our English or Greek or something. And as Japan becomes more modern, they increasingly are using less. Like if you look at pre-war Japanese writing, it's almost all Chinese characters, and they'll have a few of the phonetics in there. But now it's almost all phonetics, and it's just a few of the Chinese characters. So you can see that the profanation happening even there, the devolution.
And I'm sure the internet has accelerated that change for sure. Yeah, but so Schuon, he is straddling. It's. I don't think he understood how hard it was to really be a traditionalist and really be universalist at the same time. Or what contradictions that would produce, which you would have to deal with until you reach almost the penultimate stage of realization, where things start to come together. And I think that's what you get in perennialism. It's difficult. It's not the thing which will solve all our problems. It's a hard path.
And especially in Schuon's case, and the case with perennialism generally, is to a large degree, it's about putting these ideas out in the public.
Yeah.
And which is what Schuon did. And when you do that, you immediately create a peril, because now you got people, you get attacked from one side saying, well, you're a New Ager, you want a one world religion. As you mentioned in your book, you said that the counter initiation homed in on this, on the perennialist ideas for obvious reasons.
Yes, for obvious reasons.
But because of and so as people, no matter how many times we say we're not talking about syncretism, we're not talking about a one world religion, we're not talking about any of these things, but yet we still get the attacks of this from the sort of more orthodox religious people, because, and to a large extent, and then the counter-initiation, the NWO, whatever you want to call it, their interest in perennialism confirms to the Orthodox side that they're right.
Yeah, and Patrick Laud in I forget what it's called. Oh, it's Keys to the Beyond. That's his latest book, as far as I know. There's been another one since, which is about, he says, with the subtitle Frithjof Schuon's trans-traditional, I forget what it is, But in his introduction, he says, perennialist doctrine has to be recast now to appeal to the global intellectuals. So he came right out and said, well, this is, he's fishing for patronage from the global elites. See, this is where I go back to the evangelicals who immediately say, well, that's the Antichrist. Those are the followers of the Antichrist. And there's a lot of truth to that. The System of Antichrist, let me show you. It's a funny little cover, but the System of Antichrist, this is sort of my first book in my series of metaphysical books.
And published in 2001,
yeah.
Which is pretty remarkable, because that was at the time when, was that before or after 9/11?
It was before
9/11, yeah. Which for a lot of people, getting into our Alex Jones side, for a lot of people, 9/11 was a big wake up. So for you to have been already so far down this path even before 9/11 is pretty remarkable.
Well, it's just the way it looked to me. All the signs were there. I mean, you don't have to be a prophet or a psychic.
Sure.
You just have to,
in those days, it was like you had to go into the back of like Soldier of Fortune magazine or something, or get on the ham radio. I have an uncle who was always big on the ham radio, and he used to tell me, the black helicopters and everything. And this was, I don't know, what are you talking about? This was in the 90s he was telling this, but because he was hearing this stuff from the other guys over the ham radio, but now with the internet, so to speak, the ham radio has kind of gone universal now. Now everybody's on the ham radio saying, oh, did you see the latest movie? They're telling us what they're going to do,
Yeah. I mean, so anyway, one of the reasons this book exists is that, once a year we would drive from California to DC, so Jenny could go to one majlis of the Mariamia Tarika under Seto St. Nazare. So we talked to him afterwards, and I remember once he was saying to himself, "Oh, we should really reach out to the evangelicals." And I don't know if he ever did that, but I thought, he's right. And so what I did, I mean, when this book came out, and maybe mostly even still, but more in those days, nobody was talking about the Antichrist, but the evangelicals, the Left Behind series and all this, rather, unsophisticated, schematic view of what's going to happen in the apocalypse. But still, they were serious about it. Mm-hmm. And nobody else was talking about that. So I said, well, I'm going to say something that has a lot more dimensions to it. And yet I'm going to say, here comes the Antichrist, just like they do. And I don't know, but sometimes I wonder, it's like those guys were reading every book there was on the Antichrist, and they probably read mine, and they'd said, well, that's just weird, we can't get with this. And there's a couple of ideas in there, but no, we can't get with this. So they would never cite me, obviously.
Sure.
But I've heard since the Antichrist system has now become something I hear. So they could have got this from my book.
Yeah, and speaking of, and you derive a lot of from the Islamic tradition here, right? And for me, as a Christian, one of the points where I feel like Islam is particularly strong is in eschatology, and in Antichrist, and in
Oh yeah, there's more or less canonical material about Antichrist in Islam, if you call the Hadith canonical, which there's controversies about the Hadith certainly, but that's closer to the center of the tradition than Antichrist even is in Christianity, although he's mentioned,
Right. In Christianity, in the New Testament, we only have a few mentions, and in Eastern Orthodoxy, I think they have a few of their saints who went into it a bit. But in Islam, it's stated in the Hadith, to the extent we can say certain Hadiths are credible.
Yeah.
But very, very matter of factly that you're going to have a man who's going to be the counterfeit Messiah, and and I think in the prayers, also in the Islamic prayers, don't they say protect me from the fitna of Dajjal? Isn't this part of one of the prayers?
Yeah.
The fitna meaning a tribulation, right? Protect me from the tribulation of Dajjal, which is the Antichrist.
Right. Yeah, and the reason I say the system of Antichrist is because, people are running around saying, it's Bill Gates, it's Bill, no, it's Elon Musk, and I just, whoever ends up to be the final representative of this, he represents the system,
Right.
So.
Like St. Paul said, powers and principalities, right? It's not so much about the personality, although the personality will be a manifestation of certain powers and principalities.
Yeah. So, somewhere I said what I wanted to do was take traditionalist doctrine, and update it to the 21st century, which is the era of the paranoid conspiracy theory, because especially since 9/11 was a real watershed,
Yeah, I feel like something in the ether, or whatever you want to call it, something fractured at that event.
Oh, yeah.
When you had such a sort of this screen that just covered the entire world, putting out a false narrative, just a flat out false narrative. I feel like when people they're saying that was a real turning point for many people, and it took me it took me quite a while to kind of catch on. I actually had people in my family who were there, who were telling me, and these were people who hitherto had never said anything strange or anything, and they told me, they said the official story is not true. And I was at the age where I was just chasing after girls, and I was just, I don't want to hear anything about that. That's just silly. But as I got older, I said, they were telling me the truth, and these were people who were there, and they said, trust me. They said the official, what they're saying happened is not what exactly happened. So yeah. But it took me probably about 10 years to delay, because I was out in the world, and I was chasing after the world, and there's no benefit to running through that gauntlet, and upsetting the cocktail party, and I feel like this is very relevant also to the perennialist stuff, and like you said, how the perennialism has an appeal among certain elites. But when you go down this path, angle of perennialism, the record scratches. People start gasping, and they say, well, oh no, we don't want to talk about that. We just want to talk about the transcendent unity of the religion.
And certainly René Guénon understood, he came up with the concept of the counter-initiation. He knew there was going to be he saw in his investigation, very intimate investigation of a lot of the occult groups operating in Europe between the world wars, he saw, he was looking for the esoteric truth that he thought had been lost, in search of a lost word, as they say in Freemasonry. And, he came out saying, this isn't just wrong, this is subversive, this is bad news.
And that was in his books, he mentioned this also. And I think in his letters, his private letters, he went even more deeply into this, right?
And he did understand up to a point that there was even a political aspect to the counter-initiation, like the Theosophical Society was being used by the British colonialists, as one vector of their control in India and things like this. So, he was not averse to looking at that. But then, the people collecting around Schuon. Now, of course, Martin Lings wrote a great book on eschatology called The 11th Hour, which is, very important book. But generally speaking, Schuon was presenting the religions and the metaphysical principles in their ideal eternal aspect. This is the eternal Islam. Islam is the encounter between man as such and God as such. Okay, good. That's true. It's not untrue. With dispensing with intermediaries and advocates, in its essence. And then, of course, the intermediaries and advocates come, including Prophet Muhammad, and angels and all that. But, they're in its essence, it's just me and God. Like when Abraham left all of the religions of his time and the whole complex, huge system of Mesopotamian, ritual system and system of gods, and went into the wilderness and met God alone, as in a certain sense Moses did as well. So that's right, and then this is the ideal Christianity, this is the ideal Islam, this is the ideal Hinduism. But then you look at all of it, he talked about, then there's the human margin, which means, of course, admitting that these idealized versions of the religion are not, are conditioned by historical and human, aspects of things. Well, yeah, but he didn't go into that. You just get the sense it's all crystallized and perfect. And that's what he created around himself a kind of a suburban ashram or a section of suburbia which functioned as an ashram.
Was he out in the suburbia, or was he out like in the wilderness? And I can't quite get a read on it. In Indiana, he was.
We've been there.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was sort of a very nice suburb. It was woody. Very nice.
Yeah. Very tall. I forget what conifers those are, but with not a lot of lower branches, and just a lot of space between, and it was
not track houses.
No, it was a very gracious and kind of rich suburb of Bloomington, and.
Interesting. Kind of as an aside, I apparently his grave is not open to the public either, which I thought was kind of interesting, because I said, wouldn't that be something that I would like to visit it?
The public.
Yeah, isn't that kind of interesting?
The public are all lost.
Weren't we able to visit the grave?
Yeah, we visited it. Yeah.
Because we knew people.
Knew somebody.
You have
Okay.
to know people.
Yeah, because I did, when I looked it up, I found this, and I found a note that it says it's not open or accessible to the public, and I just, okay,
and it's
kind of interesting
that they would even say that.
Yeah, that would be made.
God, but you can't.
Yeah.
Have it, which is.
Yeah, I was surprised. Yeah, when I saw that, I was like, okay, I know.
Well,
meanwhile, Rene Guénon, I think all sorts of people go to his crypt in Egypt and to his house even, and his family brings them in the house and says, "Here, look at his library."
Yeah.
Yeah. And so Schuon created an ideal, highly aesthetic community, and I think one of the attitudes that emanates from him was, or from his followers, you can't tell exactly which, well, the final truth has been told, we know it, we've got it, and that's that, and we're just going to sit here and wait for the end of the world, because there's nothing more to say. That's, we're done with it. And I'm just, taking those ideas and mixing them with the terrors of the world today and getting them all dirty. I'm sorry, but I had to do it.
Speaking of that intersection, this is that meeting where, if you go to your average evangelical church, you're just going to hear all kinds of warnings, don't get involved with this, don't sin, not only don't sin, but, don't send your children to public school, don't do this, don't do that. And then, but there's no metaphysics there. But then when with the Schuon side, he's not going to tell you don't send your children to public. His books say nothing about how to raise a child.
Well, what he was saying is don't have children. That was one of his.
Okay.
That was one of his. Almost rules. Because why? Because this is the end. And you know what that does? It creates an image of the eternal finished truth, which is wonderful in a certain sense, because in a way, eternity is beyond generation, beyond time, and the truth is eternal and perfect. But on the other hand, we're still in this world, and to the degree that that takes its place in this world, it becomes horribly petrifying.
And from an Islamic perspective, I would imagine especially to tell people don't have children in Islam is like completely against the grain, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, marriage is half the religion, is one of the hadith. You know. So anyway, you know, the Schuon Manifestation is very ambiguous but very, very necessary. And it seems to me, you know, Schuon was not able to create, in my opinion, and if somebody knows better, then they know better, and you know, I will defer to them if their experience is different, but it's like he wasn't able to create a tariqa that would go on, you know. It kind of stopped right there. And there are younger people coming in. I mean, but I'm looking. The neo-Schuonians are operating through Facebook and WhatsApp. You know, they're doing internet-guided visualizations. You know, and if there's anything less traditional, I can't imagine what that is. You know, maybe that's all you could do, and maybe there's some good in it. But you know, it's very hard to go on from what Schuon established.
You know, one thing I read years ago, that if you have a group in this country, it tends to keep going. 100 years from now, there'll probably be Mariamia people. What they'll be like, I have no idea. But those little groups, the form, they tend, in other kids, they tend to hang on. So it wouldn't.
Yeah, that's true, because I do, you know, I mean, Hassan Ahwan and Terry Moore, you know, Sidi al-Bashir, and you know, they are all sheikhs of a kind, and are doing something which may be valuable. But what I think, you know, what I wanted to do is go a little bit back to Guénon and really talk about eschatology. And you can't talk about eschatology in these times when, you know, when let us say the counter-initiation is come to the fore, and you can see pretty clearly counter-initiatory aspects that are really integrated into the global power structure. Very consciously, ones that wish to destroy all the traditional religions. They are there, and they are operating, and they're very powerful. So, you know, and you know, from your standpoint, being a sedevacantist Catholic, you know, and having problems with the Second Vatican Council, I mean, what would you say about how the larger, you know, Catholic Church under Pope Francis, do you think it has some counter-initiatory elements?
Well, I think since Vatican II there have been problems. And Pope Francis he's very open, more open probably than John Paul II, actually.
So.
I'm not a big fan of John Paul II.
Yeah, but I mean, people say that you know, people from your neck of the woods will say that the bigger Catholic Church is basically sold out to the globalists. And somebody said they want to be the chaplaincy of the New World Order.
They did seem to.
And there's actually and it seemed to be increasingly more common strain among the conspiracy set that it's the Vatican that's behind everything, that it's Rome that's behind everything.
Yeah.
Which I find that difficult to believe, because I've heard, you know, from being Catholic myself, and speaking with my old priest about, he at one point he told me, I asked him why the the church was doing something that I found, I don't remember exactly what it was about, I found it upsetting. And I mentioned to him, I said, why are they doing this? And he said, because they're scared to death of getting sued again. He said, because of the abuse scandal almost bankrupted them.
Yeah.
And I thought, and when
the whole archdiocese went out of business.
yeah, and so when he said that, and when I hear stuff like that from a priest, and then I see the priest who goes, well, it's the Vatican who's behind everything, they're doing everything. But if they're behind it, then how are they getting hit in this way?
Well, and they have to make accommodations with with the real powers that be in the world in order to be allowed to continue. You know.
Yeah, and they're so in the world now with even with respect to just their real estate holdings. You know, the amount of real estate they hold is incredible. In New York City, it's right now my old parish in New York City, one of the convent, because there's no nuns left, so they're turning it into apartments, luxury apartments.
Sure.
And I'm like, so well. That doesn't seem like something that the head of the NWO would be forced to do, to start renting apartments to yuppies, you know.
Well, but they have a very useful network for the global elites to operate through.
Sure.
Right. You know, global reach and all of this. Yeah, and until a few years ago, we would drive to the Abbey of Gethsemane, you know, where Thomas Merton used to be, which is a little bit west of here.
That's very nice.
And they just let you go up to the you know, the choir loft and meditate at any time without announcing yourself, you know.
And you know, this is one of the great things about looking at things from a metaphysical angle, is that when you see the formal institutions all falling away, and like in Kabbalah they would call it the klipo, the husk.
The husks.
When you see the husk of all of them falling away, the Catholics, even the Jews, their formal institutions are falling away, and they're even saying the religious Jews are going, wait, what are you guys doing? You know, you're supposed to be representing us. And then, you know, of course, we all know about the Saudis and the formal. It's all falling away. And then you hear, and when I interact with the Orthodox, you know, you have this sort of this scene on the internet. They're referred as the Ortho Bros. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. It's a sort of a euphemism that's given to the young Orthodox Christian guys, mostly converts, who are extremely rabid, you know, and very exclusivist and everything. And when you put and they hold the view that the Orthodox Church is the ark of salvation. They say it's going to be the only thing that remains. But when you point to them to say, okay, your formal institutions are crumbling just like all the others.
Yeah.
But they don't know. They come up with, you know, ways to try to deny it. But we can all see it, that they're all of the formal representatives are all selling out.
Yeah, and then that's the way converts very often are, you know, and Russians more than the Greeks too.
Right. So you have in the West, you have the Russian Orthodox Church overseas. It's called the Rokor.
Outside of Russia.
Outside of Russia, right?
Also, there's the Orthodox OCA. That's pretty much Russian.
Okay.
Both those are Russian.
Yeah. The Rokor, you have these guys, American guys, and I'm not as familiar with the European side, but the American guys who convert to Rokor tend to be like the most militant and the most vehement, and they're the ones you especially hear this from, that, you know, everyone else is going, you know, not necessarily, you don't hear that, you know, it's not an evangelical thing where everyone's going to hell, but they say that the Orthodox Church is the ark of salvation and everything else is going to fall away.
You know, and then on the other hand, you have the Greek Orthodox, who are more Greek than Orthodox.
Right.
You know, and we went to the Greek Orthodox Cathedral in Oakland, right? And one of the priests was talking about, you know, I guess he was talking to the visitors, and he was talking about angels in the past. Well, you see, angels were these beings who, you know, he was like a tour guide in a museum of his own religion, you know, and I said to him, what happened to them? They all die off, you know. You know. So and that's a big. How do you hold to tradition? Because really, the revealed traditions have a higher doctrine, a higher realization, and a greater roster of saints and sages than anything else. You know, the Western esotericism, forget it. You know, it's a pale shadow of, you know, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, or Buddhism or Hinduism. You know, that's where the highest truths of the human race are enshrined, and yet the forms of these things are dissolving before our eyes.
You know, an Orthodox Jewish friend of mine, who unfortunately because of the Zionist issue, we had a falling out because of it, but we agreed on everything else. But he said something very interesting about this, and he also held perennialist views, and he said that, you know, using the Kabbalah term, the klipot, he said the hardest klipot contains I think he said like the greatest essence, or that the sweetest essence, or something like this. And he said this with regards to the religions, because, you know, in his world, for him to go to one of his fellow Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox Jews and to say what we say, they'd be like, are you an idiot? You know, we're Jews. Everybody knows that we have the truth, you know, and everyone else is just idol worshipping, you know, because he's bumping into the hardest husk there, you know, and yet within his Jewish tradition, he has some of the most, you know, beautiful truths that you're not going to hear from the New Agey people that, you know.
Yes, yeah, and there is the contradiction that Schuon, and, you know, at least, you know, with his background, with, you know, his age and whatever, this was not an excruciating contradiction for him. He was above it all, you know. He said, there's no problem for me to be a perennialist and universalist and yet a traditionalist in every one of the traditions. I can do it because
simultaneously. Yeah.
Because and you know, it's funny. We were talking last night. We were taught coming into, because we've been involved in the traditionalist world since what, 1988.
Something like that.
And we were taught by everybody. Who did we know? Houston Smith, Sayyidu Hussein Nazare, Rama Coomaraswamy, who was
Professor Cutsinger.
He was the best of them.
He was the best.
Oh, really?
Cutsinger was okay. You know, I mean, in a certain sense.
But Rama Coomaraswamy is the one I looked to.
Oh, Rama was the only one that I know who could really be a universalist and an exclusivist at the same time. But it cost him dear. It really did. And but just through knowing him, I knew it could be done.
How did he speak about his father, Ananda?
Well, he didn't speak.
He respected his father.
He respected him, and he's written a few things about him. You know, now Ananda was, of course,
he was another kind of fascinating character.
Yeah. And I was just talking to Eric Galati, who was talking to Robert Strom, who is the big editor of Ananda Coomaraswamy, and apparently there are whole boxes full of 18 different books that have never been completed, but certainly never been edited or published. So there's a lot of Ananda Coomaraswamy that has not come out. Well, I mean, I love what he did, because probably in some ways I write a little bit more like Ananda Coomaraswamy than I do like Schuon or Gano, because there's he will have a metaphysical concept, and he'll say, well, this is how Thomas Aquinas phrases it, and this is how Shankaracharya from the Vedanta phrases it, and this is how somebody else phrases it, you know, and he will draw upon many traditions in order to illustrate a particular principle, but in a way you don't feel he's trying to do a syncretism and bring these principles, these traditions together in the wrong way. He was just illustrating that principle, you know, and somehow that worked for him. And so, I mean, Ananda Coomaraswamy, he had which wife of his was related to Aleister Crowley? What is that story?
I don't remember her
name. It wasn't Rama's. Rama's mother was Doña Luisa, right?
Yes, not her.
The wife before that was related to Aleister Crowley in what way?
Was she a follower or something?
Or an ex or something?
Something weird.
You know, and so you see with things like that, well, I mean, he was a bohemian to a certain degree. You know, I mean, he you know, traveling around in European, you know, quasi-religious occult circles and all of that, as of course Schuon did as well. But yeah, the thing is, Ananda Coomaraswamy he had this, getting near the end of his life, he says, well, it's time I really got serious about my Hinduism, you know, and I'm going to, he wanted to move
Yes, he did.
to India and, you know, and do the last of the varnas of the stages of
Right.
life of, you know, or at least be the forest sage and whatever, you know, and, then soon after that he died, you know. He recognized he needed that because he hadn't really done it, but then he died, so. But you know, Rama could really be a universalist. He could accept that all the religions, you know, the revealed religions were truly sent by God, and yet, well, I mean, your traditional Catholic group, what do they think about Rama?
They admire, they respect. They don't know much about his perennialism.
Okay.
I don't talk.
Well, they've heard about it, but they've agreed to ignore it.
Something like that.
Haven't,
Something like
it's funny because they love him so much as a
They
traditional
do.
writer in traditional
Yes.
Catholicism. I mean,
Yes.
this book is the destruction of the Christian tradition.
Okay.
And you know, and they say, "Oh, Rama, you knew Rama," and then if it ever comes up, his perennialism will say, "Oh, I know about that," and they just say, "Forget it," you know, which is kind of a nice way to do it. You don't. They know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
They know why they're where they are, and they have a real spiritual path. And they don't have to worry about perennialism. Why should they disturb themselves with that? They've got enough.
Yeah, it's
We're
funny.
not doing evangelism for
Yeah.
perennialism.
It's funny you mentioned, you know, why disturb the other people, but I feel like in my own case, and probably the case of many people who have wound up down this path, I was first disturbed by it. I was poked by it because I kept, you know, I felt like, especially when I first went to Japan. I lived in Japan, and of course, coming from, I was not religious at the time, and yet I went to Japan. You know, you never quite lose the vessel. Like I think Jose Nazare also said this about Christendom. Mm-hmm. He said that no matter how hard Christendom tries to shake the vessel, it'll never shake the vessel that it was born in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So now it's become sort of a parody of Christendom. Mm-hmm. But so when I went to Japan and I saw, you know, a completely non-Christian, I mean, to the extreme, a non-Christian culture. I mean, for them, especially at that time, Christianity was only less than 1% of the country, you know. And yet here is they have their own world and they have their own morality, and in many ways it's more moral than the Christian West. And I was trying to make sense of this, and I said, how could they be out here and they've never had any significant conversion to Christianity or even Islam or anything, and yet they just have a system that for them works. And so this sort of little this grain of sand kept turning around in like the oyster kept you know, how does this work, and I kept trying to figure out. Eventually I stumbled onto the Hare Krishnas. I never became a Hare Krishna, but I started reading his writings, and he was a perennialist himself, Prabhupada. You know, if you see his interviews in this,
and it's easier for Hindus than a lot of other people to be perennials
it's
because
not.
you know, Jesus becomes in some systems one of the avatars of Vishnu or something like this, and you know, they can do that, you know, or Buddha as well.
There's one of Prabhupada's he had interviews that he did on mainstream TV, I guess, because he was creating such a stir. They would bring him on the evening news, you know, like Channel 7 or something, and they had him there with his big garland and everything, and his big robe and everything, and they going, and you know, you probably remember, he was very rigid, you know, very orthodox, you know, he said you can't eat meat, you know, vegetarian, you know, no gambling, no intoxication, you know, he said these are absolute rules, you cannot break these rules. And then the reporter said to him, well, what about the other religions? What do you say about them? And then all of a sudden he just softens Prabhupada. He just suddenly goes, oh, it's all just it's different aspects of the same thing, you know. His
Well,
whole demeanor changed.
So-
you know, he was so hard, and all of a sudden, it's all the same.
That was like Rama. Rama was completely an exclusive. I mean, you know, he was Mother Teresa's cardiologist.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he at one point, you know, because as a young man, he was taken by his father to India, and he received his Brahmin initiation and his sacred thread and whatever it is.
And his mother was European, I think, right?
South American.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and
Okay.
she was Jewish, or
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
which is another, you know,
Interesting, yeah.
you know, that's, you know, to talk about heterogeneous influences. But then, you know, when he came to the West, he said, well, I can't really practice, you know, traditional Hinduism in the West. After all, you lose caste when you go to the West if you really want to be serious about Orthodox Hinduism. You know, so what is the equivalent, you know, the true tradition of the West? And he said, well, it's Catholicism. So he became a Catholic. And then soon afterwards, Vatican II came along and started to deconstruct, you know, the religion that he had found. And so he has a series. I've all got it on my computer, which it should be published. But he had a dialogue with Mother Teresa.
Mm-hmm.
Now, but the problem is there's only a few little notes from Mother Teresa. You know, he would go to Mother Teresa and provide her with a vast, you know, legal brief of why, you know, Vatican II was heterodoxy, quoting, you know, earlier popes and theologians and saints, you know, in a vast thing, you know, and saying, because he was thinking if Mother Teresa could come out against Vatican II, then it might mean something.
Uh-huh.
You know, but you know, she would just write back and says, "Oh, Ram, you know, you're hurting Jesus. We have to follow the Pope." You know, that was their dialogue. It was rather asymmetrical.
Yeah.
You know, but you know, so he, you know, then he became part of the Society of St. Pius X under Archbishop Lefebvre, who were the main dissidents to Vatican II that remained within the major church. And then he had problems with them because he said, how could you say that the Pope is a valid Pope and everything that we've ever said a Pope was, including infallible, but on the other hand, you know, you don't have to believe him if he teaches something heterodox, and you can ignore everything he said and do whatever you want. It's a contradiction. It doesn't work. So then they formed something called the Society of St. Pius X of the Fifth, and that is the state of the contest.
It is. Except I think he broke with them.
Yeah, he broke with them as well.
He broke with everybody.
But you know, state of the contest, for those who don't know, means the seat is vacant, which means the belief that all the popes, you know, the last valid pope was Pius XII, you know. And then, so he broke with them, and then he and Cicada,
Yeah.
you know, Father Anthony Cicada passed away a few years ago, was at St. Gertrude, the great Catholic church in Cincinnati area, and you know, and finally he just kept going, and then finally he ended up pretty much alone because he was very, very hard on his principles.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't. He put those beyond getting along with a group.
Mm-hmm.
He ended up connecting with Father Malachi Martin at one
Yeah, he
point.
did, actually. That was
And
interesting. Toward the end of his life.
Because toward the end of his life, you know, he had bone cancer for a long time, and he would, I think he had the last rites 3 times, and he'd go into remission, and it went on and on and on, and he at the end of his life, his health was such that he could no longer be a surgeon, you know, and so he retrained as a psychiatrist very late in life, because and then he was ordained as a sedevacantist Catholic priest.
Even though he was still married.
Even though he was still married,
And
even though his wife didn't believe in sedevacantism, which was another problem.
Mainstream church. His wife was.
Yeah, that must not have been much fun. and then he, ended up doing some exorcism, or participating in some exorcisms with Father Malachi Martin in the New York area. So, what a career!
Yeah, wow.
So, but he was the one. God,
And interesting because he's not quite as well known as Schuon and everything. I mean, of course, I've come across his name, but I haven't read his writings, and
Well, I mean, his writings are mostly from a traditionalist Catholic direction. They're not. He's got a few perennialist essays, but not a lot. And
he was a perennialist, but he didn't write much.
Yeah, but he was part, and he was following Schuon, and then the various scandals hit, which we'll not go into, which is very common for religious leaders these days. And I think after that, some of the other Schuon's followers didn't quite trust him because of the position he took or something. But
and he testified before the grand jury. He would never tell us what he said because it's not available to the public.
It's sealed testimony.
So he wouldn't talk about it.
He wouldn't talk about it. But they had to keep him around because one of their claims to legitimacy was his father. So he carried the name of Ananda Coomaraswamy, and so
I think and Schuon held held him in the utmost regard. I think wasn't he one of the ones who, when René Guénon was asked to revise his view on Buddhism, wasn't Ananda one of the ones who went and
or the name that comes to me was Marco Paulus.
Right. I think it was the two of them and maybe someone else also. They actually went in person and visited him.
Exactly. They talked to him.
Yeah, because his view of Buddhism might have been ruined by the Theosophical Society, which he saw all the problems with it. So I don't know, but and so Sarah was saying Nazare's Foundation for Traditional Studies, which used to put out the journal Sophia, which is a wonderful, it's not publishing anymore, but that was a wonderful publication. Rama was on, one of the officers or board of that foundation. But he was the one that could live the contradictions and was willing to shoulder the burden of the contradiction.
And so in his personal life, he was, of course, a practicing Catholic. But other than that, what was his involvement with other traditions or?
Well, I mean, he accepted the validity of them, certainly of Hinduism and of, and of Christianity and of Islam and of Buddhism.
So internally, they presented no contradiction whatsoever with him.
Well, or he
at one point he was close to Schuon, but as the Schuon problems came out, he sort of got alienated from those people.
Okay.
Because of that stuff.
Yeah, not officially. Not coming out against Schuon or anything like that. But
so I see what you mean, that he was totally involved with whereas yourself or myself, I can't be that involved with my church in that regard, because of it's difficult. I'm like, I don't. When people ask me, how do you hold these views and attend church? And I say, well, because I'm not telling the priest to get on the homily and start talking about it. I say it's my own personal views. It's not.
Yes, and Alvin Moore was another very interesting and helpful person who was. He was James Cutsinger's godfather, and he used to work for the Library of Congress, and he didn't write. He wrote a few articles, didn't write any books. His greatest publications were Christmas cards. He was little Christmas cards with icons on them, and then do a short meditation on the meaning of the icons. Just lovely, we don't have a complete set, but they should be collected and published as a lovely coffee table book. I'm not kidding. It was just lovely. But he made the mistake of trying to preach perennialism to his Orthodox priest, and that you don't do that.
You mentioned also, I think James Cutsinger had a similar type of issue where his views caused controversy among his fellow.
The story. Should we tell the story?
Okay, tell the story.
Well, one of probably the best thing Cutsinger ever did was right after 9/11, and it was organized before 9/11, but right after 9/11 was this conference in the University of South Carolina where he used to teach, called Paths to the Heart, where he brought together Orthodox priests and Sufis.
Callistus Ware, for instance.
Yeah, Callistus Ware was there, and Vincent Rossi. That's a story.
I like Vincent.
Vincent Rossi was great. You know, he was the head of a sort of a New Age monastic organization called the Holy Order of Mans, which converted mostly, not all of them, en masse to Orthodoxy and became the Christ the Savior Brotherhood. And he sort of, helped them or led them in that direction. And but still,
he studied at Oxford under Callistus Ware.
Yeah.
I used, when I was in California, I'd go up to Santa Rosa. He did just a little, very informal Bible study that a few people attended.
Oh yeah, and he did one at our house too.
Yes.
At San Rafael.
So I was glad I could find something like that.
Yeah,
That's good.
And so anyway, he was there, and Sierra de San Nazare was there, and some other people, and the theme was, what is the spiritual heart? Because both the Sufis and the Hesychasts in Orthodoxy talk about the heart, prayer of the heart. So what is the heart? So very, that was a very interesting way to, to do perennialism, to bridge the gap between the traditions by focusing on that theme.
Certainly, yeah.
It was perfect for right after 9/11, just perfect. Unfortunately, and it was, but then Cutsinger did this luminous presentation of the ontological hierarchy, where he's taking you up step by step, or as St. John Climacus would say, the ladder of divine ascent. And he took us through it, and we saw it. But when he got to the top, you did not have the beatific vision of God. What you had is the transcendent unity of religions. That's the highest thing. And it isn't the highest thing. It's an important orientation that we need to have, because we're now, whether we like it or not, in a world of religious pluralism. And so how are we going to deal with it? Well, that's probably the best way to deal with it. But that realization is not the esoteric, ultimate, transcendent truth. And the way you deal with perennialism and the conflict between, exclusivism, faithfulness to one tradition, and a universalism which understands that more than one revelation is valid, is by going as far as you can. Every time that contradiction comes, don't get involved in it. Just go closer to God. Go closer to God. Once you get to God, that contradiction is not going to be there. But don't try to solve it before you get there, because your life is short, and your job, is to draw your soul through purification and remembrance and grace as close to God and union with God and submission to the will of God as you possibly can. And that should take up all your energy, and worrying about other traditions, whether you oppose them or accept them, should be a secondary matter. So anyway,
this reminds me of I'm also one of the questions that perennialists are often asked is the question of orthodoxy. Lowercase o orthodoxy.
Yeah.
Well, they say, well, how do you know? Well, then how? What's your criteria? How do you judge one tradition to be valid and one tradition to be not valid? And the only response you can give is, the same way you judge anything to be true. You judge it based on that situation. Is it true or is it not true? They want to know, is there a system? Is there a checklist where I can say, does it have everything that's required?
Yeah.
Well, and on some levels there is a checklist. Though I would say, an Orthodox tradition has to understand that there's a supreme principle, however you define it, that principle is both transcendent and immanent, that principle has revealed itself to us and shown us a way to unite with it or come closer to it, and that the union with it requires, the death to the self, mortification of the self. I mean, and so that knocks out Scientology and Wicca and a lot of other things which are not doing that. I mean, you can up to a point, but
there is a peril also in that there are certain movements that do have a lot of these elements there.
Yeah.
And then you find yourself in a kind of predicament. You say they have, they claim that they've reconciled the one and the many.
Yeah.
They claim that, the transcendent and the immanent. They claim all this stuff, and they have all the elements. Like one thing that I came across was Baha'i, I don't know how you pronounce it. Yeah. I was on social media and I saw some advertisement and I read the description. I say it was about some kind of meeting in my city, and I said, that sounds fantastic. The different religions and blah, blah, and then I get there and it's about Baha'i, and I said, well, is that something I really want? I'm like, I'm not sure. Speaking of,
well, I mean,
there you go to what would Nazare say about Baha'i, for instance?
I don't think he'd go for it.
No. I mean, he would say you have to put that in relation to Islam. How faithful is it to the Islamic world? Because that is what it came out of. And once you do that,
but that just makes him like one of the Jews who didn't accept Jesus, right? You know what I mean? I mean, you can make that.
I know, but
well, I mean,
I know that well.
I always say, if God wishes to bless Baha'i as a way back to him, he might have done it for all I know. I just can't see it.
This gets into another interesting, very kind of relevant topic, and a question I often hear, and one of my main perennialist friends and I often talk about this is, of course, everybody knows that within Orthodox traditions you have sort of counter-initiative and anti-traditional forces there.
Yeah.
Everybody knows this. Even the ordinary religious people know this, right?
Yeah.
But it also appears that even within what you might call counterfeit traditions, there do seem to be elements of holiness in them. This is a paradox.
Well, there are elements of truth, and the question is, I mean, okay, Prophet Muhammad said, acts are judged by their intent. So if you have a sincere belief in a false system, a false, from another standpoint, a false doctrine, is that spiritually efficacious? Well, it certainly has a bunch of hurdles to jump. Schuon has a very interesting concept called sincerism, which is the problem of believing that subjective sincerity can obviate the effects of objective error. And it's a very good point to make that all the sincerity in the world can't make 2 and 2 equal 5. I mean, there is objective truth, and the spiritual path has to do with our conforming ourselves to objective truth. Otherwise, you end up in a sort of a postmodernist set where all views of reality, all voices that speak are equal. From the sublime to the ridiculous, it doesn't matter, but there's no criterion. You can't stand outside them and judge between one or the other.
This is how, when I was on my path, before I became religious again, and when I took a brief sojourn through New Age, and I stumbled upon these things called the Seth books. You probably
I mean, I read New Age for 2 years solid.
Yeah.
Oh, the Seth material, oh.
And one of I started having suspicions about the material. At first I was like, oh, these are great, and I said, this is before I became religious and anything. And I was like, oh, these are great, there's a lot of sort of wisdom in here and everything. And then I began participating in some of the online social media Seth groups. And the moment where I really knew that it was bogus was I asked them, I said, okay, so, one of the themes of the Seth stuff and all the New Age stuff, I guess, what is it, the Abraham Hicks and all this stuff, is, everything's an experience. It's just an experience, So then I asked them, I say, well, if everything is just an experience, and if everything has value, then why should I read Seth books instead of just looking at pornography? Mm-hmm. And then, because of course the whole scene is based on the Seth books. Yeah. So I said, why don't I, if it's all the same, I'll just go look at pornography instead of Seth books. And then they found themselves tap dancing, trying to say, well, Seth books and pornography are no, they're both just as good, but so I caught them, and that was when it kind of broke for me. I said, no, this is nonsense.
Because you look at pornography, you don't have the actress in pornography saying, in between scenes, by the way, read the Seth book. They don't do that. Well, I mean, and this is okay. You find this. William Blake, for example, has one of his proverbs of hell. Is everything possible to be believed is an image of truth. And that's a principle. On the other hand, he said, severity of judgment is a great virtue. And he was very hard on certain points and he said, to be in error and to be cast out is part of God's plan. Well, how is that true if everything possible to be believed is an image of truth? That's one of those paradoxes. Ibn al-Arabi said a lot of things similar. I mean, in his Fusus al-Hikam, which is, that means the bezels of wisdom. Bezels are like the setting for a jewel in a ring is the bezel, And it's based upon, I forget, was it 22 or 28 different prophets. Each chapter is a chapter of a different prophet, Adam, Noah, Seth, Abraham, etc., etc. And the chapter on Noah, because Noah had come to sweep away in his own time the world of pagan polytheism. That's why the flood was sent. The human race had become degenerate, worshiping different gods, which were essentially deifications of different human passions. And so it got so bad that God repented of creating the human race and wiped it all out except for Noah and his family, is the story. So Ibn al-Arabi accepted that was indeed God's will, And then he turns around and says, on the other hand, God will accept the worship paid to idols if the worshiper is sincere. And he says both. And yet God says wipe them out. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, he accepts that if because acts are judged by their intent, as the prophet said, if you pay worship of that idol, God will on some level accept that worship. And he goes beyond that and he says, well, but then every conception we have of God is an idol, because he's beyond all conceptions. And so, but we have to have a conception of him in order to come near to him, to worship him. We have to follow the names of God, because we can't just follow the absolute unknowable essence, because it's unknowable. There's no
we need something to grab hold of.
Yeah, So there's such a thing as the God created in belief. Everybody's got a God created in belief. And the Sufis have a practice called fekr or fakr, which comes from the word, the same root as fakir, which means the poor one, the poor man. As Jesus said, blessed are the poor in spirit, for they shall see God, which is, in Arabic, the poor in the spirit would be the fukara, the fakirs. So the idea of this practice is you understand God is giving of himself to you and generating versions, images of himself that come to you, and you need to accept them and say, well, this is God's revelation to me. But as soon as you accept that revelation and venerate it, it suddenly becomes an idol. You say, wait, that's not really God. That's just a conception. Goodbye. God's beyond that. And it's a practice of receiving images of God, conceptions of God from God, and being informed by them and being, venerating them and then also understanding them as idols and letting them pass or rejecting them, and then another conception comes, and it's a practice that goes on and on. But in a less, a little slower way of doing it, we all have gods created in belief, and we can't relate to God without these.
One of my favorite terms is one of my favorite terms is the and Gnan likes to refer to it also. The Sanskrit term is the upaya.
Yeah.
The support. I think this means a support.
Well, it's or a spiritual method, or
yeah. And it's
basically more a Buddhist idea than anything else.
Yeah, a Buddhist idea, and meaning, so like a step, a support, a method to help sort of catapult you up higher, out of. One of my favorite quotes from Schuon also is he mentions that man needs a way out of the forms. I forget exactly where he put this, but he said without the religions, man would not have a way out of the forms.
Yeah, without a form that has somewhere within it a way out of the forms, which is how I define a sacred form, there would be no way. Yeah. Now, the Buddhists would tend to say, even the most essential doctrines of Buddhism, the Noble Eightfold Path and the fourfold, whatever it is, suffering and the ending of suffering, and the basic principles of Buddhism, those are just upayas, because the Buddhists, more than anyone else, are afraid of reifying ideas, reifying doctrines. That they have an exquisite sensitivity to what Muslims would call idolatry, intellectual idolatry or attachment. So, they say, the Mahayana says, the Bodhisattva vows to save all sentient beings. And how can he do this? Because he has no conception of himself as a bodhisattva or of such a thing as all sentient beings. That's how he can save all sentient beings. Yeah. And they keep talking like that because they don't want you to fix on one of these concepts and say, well, that's it.
Well, one of the biggest differences I've noticed, I'm mentioning being married to somebody from Japan myself, is as a Westerner going to Japan, as Westerners, the notion of the individual is like the air we breathe. The concept of the individual. It's something that it's so ubiquitous that we don't even think about it. We don't question it. But when you go to the Far East, that notion is not there. They don't view themselves as individuals. They're a collective. When you go to Japan, certainly there are Japanese persons, but they're a member of Japan, of the Japanese people. And for them, you have this sort of stereotype when the West looks at the Far East, where they accuse them of being like a hive mind and collectivism and everything, but when you go there and you spend time and especially if you know language, after a while you go, I get it, and it's not a bad thing. There is an upside to it, and it's
I remember as a Catholic, I remember before the counterculture and before Vatican II, strangely enough, the mass use of LSD in Vatican II happened at exactly the same moment. Exactly the same moment. What's that all about? Think about that. Yeah. But, before that, I lived in a parish, not in a town. I was integrated into the universal one holy Catholic apostolic church.
Growing up in New York, it was still, we had the remnants of this still. You didn't have a neighborhood, you had a parish.
Yeah.
And then of course that's now all gone. But
and it would tend to be an ethnic neighborhood at the same time.
You had your Italian parishes, your Irish parishes,
Polish parishes,
Puerto Rican, definitely. Japan, I noticed also a pattern there that in the Far East, where this notion of the individual is really not there, you have a tendency towards impersonal conceptions of God.
Yeah.
And then as you go further west, where the individual becomes a concrete, in their mind, a concrete reality, suddenly God becomes a personality and an individual, you know, to the extent where even, you know, with Christianity, he is a person, literally a person, you know.
Yeah, and you know, individualism can be a great, you know, on one level, it's a liberation of the human person from an impersonal collective where that full humanity can be suppressed to a certain degree. On the other hand, it's a terrible alienation and loneliness, and you're an individual, but so what? Everybody else is an individual too.
That's touching exactly on one of my favorite concepts in Japanese is called gaman. Now, if you ever heard this term, and when it's translated into English, gaman literally it's always translated as just patience, you know, and that's good enough for the English speakers, patience. But it actually contains a much deeper meaning in Japan, and the best definition I've heard is it means keeping quiet about your own personal problems because in the grand scheme of things they're no more important than anyone else's.
Yeah.
So that,
well,
just
we could learn a
resignation
little bit about that.
Yeah, it's just basically that's why. So
no,
you know,
internet trolls in Japan. Eh?
Yeah, well, actually that is an issue there too. But you know, in the Japanese army, they would like, for example, I was reading a book about World War II, and when the Japanese soldiers were getting transported out into the Pacific, they had them in the bellies of the ships, you know, and it was sweltering hot, and the soldiers were, of course, none of them dared go to the superior and say anything because, you know, you don't do that in their culture, but they were talking amongst themselves that it's too hot down the belly of the ship. So apparently the, you know, word somehow made its way up to the officers, and the message they sent back down was, well, if you think you're hot, imagine the horses, because they're down even lower in the ship than you, and it's even hotter down there. So keep quiet about your own discomfort. But it's a very Eastern way of looking at things.
So, you know, I mean, collectivism beyond a point can be alienating, but on another level, it's very integrating, and you know. Whereas individualism can be very liberating. On the other hand, it's totally isolating and alienating as well. So look, we do have an East and a West in this whole human race, and there's probably a reason for that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. One of the, you know, as growing up as a Westerner and being totally immersed in the West, and you know, when you go to the East and you see certain things like one of the benefits of a more collectivist society is anonymity. You know, and when we think of, for us as Westerners, anonymity is like one of our greatest fears. You know, I need to be known, I need to be recognized. You know, but for them, you just blend in and just become like a school of fish. But then one of the beautiful parts of that is that when you have this anonymity, it opens an opportunity for sort of spiritual growth, because suddenly the scrutiny is off of you now. As long as you keep the outward, I guess you'd call it, like in Japan, they have their own, maybe the word Sharia is not appropriate, but you know, their etiquette. They have a very rigid etiquette, social etiquette. And if you follow that etiquette, nobody cares what religion you are. They don't care if you're Muslim, they don't care. Just perform the outward politeness. And you know, whereas in the West, it's like kind of the opposite. If you're a Christian and I'm a Christian, well, you could be, you know, your etiquette is off a little bit, but that's okay because you're also going to heaven because we're both Christian, you know.
Yeah. And it takes all kinds to make a world, I used to say.
Yeah.
Nowadays they say, it takes all kinds to destroy a world. Everybody's got their own part to play.
Yeah. It takes all kinds to do the work of Shiva, I guess you could say, right? Shiva has many employees in the dissolution.
And I mean, what do you say about this?
I don't know.
Do you know? Are you a repressed individual who gotta be me, like Sammy Davis Jr., or are you someone who wants to be, you know, a handmaiden of Christ along with all the other handmaidens?
Well, the thing is that you tend to have different aspects of you. You want different ways of being, and I think that's most people. As to which one's predominant at what time, it's hard to say.
Yeah.
I wanted to touch on one other topic, is the speaking of eschatology, and you did your recent video on AI and the role that AI, and especially as I was actually laughing as I was watching the video. I said, wow, how, because being though you have a background as a poet, as an artist, and this hits exactly on the part of the controversy on AI, both from a sort of worldly perspective, because people are angry because they claim that it's stealing their work and this and that, but then also from a spiritual perspective, because as you mentioned, can AI really capture the essence of a person? You said something like,
does it want to capture the essence?
Put in the prompt, write me a poem in the style of Charles Upton.
Yeah, I actually, did I say that?
You mentioned something like that.
Yeah, because that was a thought I've never done AI. It's almost like I don't think I want to watch pornography, watching it once is too much.
Right. Myself also, I don't even know where to access it, honestly. I mean, I'm sure I could find it if I would try it, but I don't see the appeal of it.
I've got it on my computer, which comes in my face every time I try to do something else. Ask a question. Mm-hmm. I mean, AI.
And we're at the point now where I haven't confirmed this, but speaking of the sort of more conspiracy-minded sort of stuff, where I believe a lot of the pop music, the very popular pop music right now, is already being written by AI. I suspect this because it has a sort of droning, almost hypnotic quality to it that it just kind of keeps you. It's not like the pop songs of years past where it has like a hook that just gets you, and then the song's over, and okay, you had the feeling came, and now it's But the current ones, they just kind of keep you wanting. It just kind of keeps beckoning you. Okay, keep listening, keep buying. Keep streaming the music.
Keep buying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I fear that people are talking about social media addiction. Finally, when it's too late to do anything about it, people realize there's such a thing. And that people, who do too much social media become more alienated, more depressed. It's just not a healthy thing, because you have to create a false self in order to relate to other people with a false self, and you hope your false self will be as popular or more popular than other false selves, and that the whole thing is horribly alienating.
Yeah, and Renee Guénon in Reign of Quantity, it's right there in our face now. It's just likes, subscribes, and it doesn't. I often think about this. I'm like, well, one guy may kind of like the video and he clicks like, and another guy may just be in ecstasy and he clicks like, but it's the same likes now.
Yeah, right.
Or one guy may be a complete idiot and he clicks the like, and another guy may be a universal genius and he clicks the like. But they're equal now.
Yeah.
And this is like democracy, right? My vote and your vote, it's equal. We're the same.
It's all voting. You vote Republican or Democrat. That's all you got. I know. So, and I fear that there are people who nowadays wake up and they ask, Chat GPT or Copilot or whatever it is that I've got on my computer, which pops up whenever you do anything. Ask him a question. Would you like to know? I wish it wasn't where I move the cursor up to the corner and X something out, and that comes up.
You must have a newer version of the Windows or whatever, because I guess I don't have this yet, but they're trying to integrate it into everything now, certainly.
Yeah, and there may be people who go to AI, they wake up in the morning and say, I don't know, what should I do today? I don't know what I should believe about anything, or what I should do, or who am I? Okay. First question, who am I? Second, what should I believe? And third, what should I do today? And it says, well, I'll tell you, you are. We'll look at all the websites you've ever gone to, and then everything, and we'll say, this is your profile. This is you.
And sort of disturbing also, I've seen, a lot of people claim that AI has like a spiritual aspect to it, and that they'll claim, well, give me, speaking right on the topic of perennialism, they say, well, give me a synthesis of the essence of all of the great religions. And then the AI will produce this apparently eloquent sort of essay on what they have in common, and then somebody reads that and they go, well, it's got it. Now we know.
Yeah. And what are you going to do about that? And, people people abdicate different levels of their being. When we abdicated, that every 99.9% of the people on the earth did hard physical labor every day. So they had that. Because of that, they had bodies. Then we said, no, we have labor-saving devices. That was kind of liberating up to a point. But then the labor-saving devices become more and more irritating, more and more complicated, and more time-consuming. So that fails. But anyway, you give your physical nature over to artificial aids, and so you start to lose your body. You lose.
You experience an atrophy.
Yeah, and in cyberspace, you lose the world of the five senses. All of the spiritual literature says, well, this is how you transcend the world of the five senses. Hey, what we need is even to get there before we can even begin to transcend it.
I call it a sort of an additional Maya on top of Maya.
Yeah, Maya upon Maya, and finally we said, well, now artificial intelligence can think and feel for me, so you can do it. So isn't it wonderful to have been liberated from all human functions? So we don't even have to exist. We don't even have the burden of existence. What a relief! Is that what we're looking for?
I kind of want to often going down a rabbit hole where for me it's easy to draw a line between what Guénon called craft and technology.
Yeah.
For me, craft is basically, it's indefinitely sustainable. I think the Amish have probably a close hold on what we would call craft. That lifestyle can continue indefinitely. Spiritual and metaphysical factors aside, if you're just looking at the physical aspect, resource-wise, human-wise, everything, it can go like that indefinitely, right? Now, once you bring industry into the picture, now you're talking about something that's on borrowed time. The mining, the drilling, the consumption, the pollution. We can all see that it can't continue. It's already crumbling for our eyes. Our health is crumbling because of it. The infrastructure, even like in New York, in places like New York, and I think southern Florida, like even the sewers can't handle the infrastructure anymore. They're having problems with the sewers getting clogged and overflowing because it's just...
And Manhattan Island is sinking because the skyscrapers are too heavy. Yeah. But, I know. We're seeing the end of technological civilization. Mm-hmm. When once we start to get cyber war in space, satellite against satellite, so we can avoid total nuclear destruction.
A never-ending black hole of just throwing money at. And another thing that I find kind of so amusing is that Elon Musk, very prominent figure in all of this stuff, says that because he's one of his big things, probably his main thing actually, is the space exploration when you have it, right? And I heard he said that. To paraphrase him, he essentially said, once we explore enough, we'll discover the meaning of life. So from a metaphysical perspective, it basically means, once we dissipate enough, once we go out enough, then we'll capture the essence, the center.
Of course, yeah.
Which is so backwards.
It's backwards. The truth is out there. So you say on the old X-Files,
Whereas,
this is terminal in so many different ways, and this is what René Guénon recognized, and every revealed tradition has recognized that this is what happens. Guénon was among the best in the Reign of Quantity and the Signs of the Times when he was talking about what the Antichrist will be the height of artificiality, and he will be a heap of residues, of klipoth, if you will, a heap of husks, of all things of the whole world age gathered together and erected into this universal idol, which will triumph over everything and eat up all the other idols and become king of the world for a couple of weeks and then die.
He also, said something else that I always think back to, that I can't quite grasp what he's saying. I have an idea, but he said something about that the Antichrist will paradoxically, speaking of individualism, individuality, he'll be like, his individuality will be effaced. He used this word, effaced. He'll represent an effacement of individuality.
Yes.
Which, being, I guess, now we're in an age of ego, and everybody is, but I guess Antichrist, he's going to reach such a peak of it that paradoxically, his ego will be effaced, and he'll become like a parody of selflessness, I guess.
Yeah, well, I think, one of the aspects of, it's nihilism, and whether you call this Satanism, Satanism, tries to say first, what a lot of the Satanists are saying for the masses, the exoteric belief is, we don't really believe in Satan and spooks like that. Satan is simply the principle that everybody got a right to do what they want, what they got to do, and what's wrong with saying look out for number one, and that's how you're happy, which is ridiculous. But
isn't it like do as thou wilt? Is that the? Yeah. Some people argue that when Aleister Crowley said this, that's not what he meant, but.
Well, he said, "Do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," but then he said,
"Love is the whole of the law."
Love is the whole of the law.
Love is the law,
and love under will.
Right.
That's where it went wrong.
Okay.
It's will under love. So that's the basic inversion. You can't put love under will. You can't make a slave out of love. Love is the king. So, that last phrase that people say saves his idea, doesn't save it at all. Right. So one of the reasons to talk about eschatology, because we see everywhere we look, we see things winding down, coming to, AI has even predicted that the fall of civilization. It ought to know.
I just saw on YouTube.
It is the fall of civilization.
I just saw on YouTube, I think it was yesterday, as a matter of fact, a commercial that YouTube threw at me, talk about relevant. It was for Expedia, the travel company, and it said basically, just like empires, prices rise and fall. I was like, well, that's a kind of strange advertisement to just throw at you for a travel company. I'm like, do I really want to think of,
Right. Well, it sounds like you're going to, take a Caribbean cruise and then, the captain and the crew are going to abandon ship at some port and they're sitting there. Right. Well, things like that are happening now,
Yeah.
But wow. So
when we first spoke on video, it was a couple of years ago now. One of the things, having just come out of the other side of the whole COVID debacle, and all this sort of insanity that we saw over about 3 years, 2020 to 2023, and it seems like we're in like an intermission now, almost. We're in like a lull, and I feel like. This is at church. I say the same thing to my old priest. Said the same thing. I say we're at the point now where like the rubber is meeting the road. You can't just. The world is forcing you to act now. That God is forcing you to. You can't just stay cloistered up and I'm above the world, like the Schuonian kind of. I'm above the world. Because now the world's coming for you.
Yeah.
And this is where eschatology really matters, because they say you can wax poetical all day about the transcendent unity of religions, but they're gonna come for you too, so, and then what, and then Genon he was trying to prepare people for this, and so.
Well, yeah, exactly what and one of the ways the world comes for you is that the apocalyptic energies that are being unleashed in today's world, which come to most of us simply through fear of nuclear war, fear of economic collapse, fear of the collapse of the environment, and this impinges upon us. And what that does I mean, even if they don't come for you by stealing your bank account or sending you to a concentration camp or whatever they could do, the world is coming for you because it's energizing all of the elements of your ego, all your attachments, all your idols. The apocalyptic energies are energizing the idols within us, and they're all coming out. And any idol, attachment, fixed belief, which is any tendency to accept something other than God as effectively absolute in our lives, which is what an idol is. Any one of those that we haven't let go of by now, we're going to be forced to worship and live out the consequences of. And that's why we have this ideological craziness. Trump.
Right.
Trump. All I say is that Trump's followers deserve a lot better than him.
Yeah. I just funny you mentioned him because I just had a thought when I was of how the world tries to pull you in. I was in upstate New York in a little touristy place upstate New York in 2020, right before the election, or was it right after the election? And there was a woman there. Of course, I lean more conservative. I mean, I haven't voted in years and years. I don't think anybody who understands metaphysics would even bother. But there was a lady. Somehow I wound up in a conversation with a very nice woman who was wearing the red Trump hat. And we were talking about the election had just passed, I guess. And she's like, "Who'd you vote for?" I said, "I didn't even bother voting." And she goes, "Well then you voted for Biden then."
Yeah.
And I said, "Well,
that's it. That's the only those only alternatives. Worldly alternatives. Like what I say is the concept in Apocalypse or of Gog and Magog, or in the Quran of Yajuj and Majuj. This represents worldly alternatives that have been absolutized. So we have the struggle between Gog and which you're gonna choose, Gog or Magog. You have to choose.
Yeah.
But to say Gog and Magog together is saying don't go into those worldly dichotomies because they're all invented by the devil. If the devil draws the sides in conflicts or controversies, then whatever side you take is wrong. Don't play that game.
I always imagine the image of, I think Ganon, he referred to the yin and yang symbol as like a metaphysical symbol par excellence.
Yeah.
For me, the inversion of that would be the same symbol but missing the dots.
Missing the dots.
So you're locked into the duality there. So this is what the world is pulling you in and saying, here's reality, black and white, pick a side. So.
Yeah, that's it. And so anything that you have falsely absolutized in your belief system, you're going to have to live out the consequences of.
I think also of a quote, I think it's from Goethe, the German author, where he says, beware, our idols and demons will pursue us until we learn to let them go. So it's the same idea. And
there is, on the other hand, an eschatological conflict between Christ and Antichrist, between Messiah and anti-Messiah. There is a real conflict that is not simply one of those barren conflicts between two equally crazy alternatives, like Gog and Magog. Which, in popular culture, you can see an awful lot. I guess it's in video games, it's in movies, and then I call it the good demons versus the bad demons. You're not going to go with the bad demons, right? Are you? You need to go with the good demons. In other words, the actual decision, the actual alternatives between truth and falsehood are falsified down to whatever you choose is just another false alternative, But, so I guess my next interview with Jeffrey Mishlove, who's been really good at interviewing me, and he's got a pretty good audience. New Thinking Aloud is what he calls his thing, podcast. And I think the next one I'm going to talk about is is there an eschatological conflict? You get that in all the traditions. You have some Antichrist figure in very many traditions. Zoroastrianism, certainly. Found one in Vajrayana tradition in the Kala Chakra. That there's the leader of the forces of darkness. Well, how is the difference between the Antichrist, the leader of the forces of darkness, versus Christ or the Mahdi? However you look at it. How is that to be differentiated from all these false, dichotomies between Gog and Magog, which you should never get involved in? What are the criteria? And it has to do with the human form. There are those forces which support the integrity of the human form, and those forces which ultimately, their ultimate goal is apparently to deconstruct the human form.
Yeah, you just reminded me, that actually I'm glad you said that, because you just reminded me of another name I wanted to ask you about, Ezra Pound. Because I'm on my way to New York right now, and right in Manhattan, in the Public Library in New York, they have Ezra Pound's papers there. And I saw you can go and take a look at them if you can give them your library card, and they'll let you take a look at it. I said, wow, how interesting, because I've been, even before I became interested in metaphysics and everything, I kind of wound up interested in Ezra Pound. And,
Ezra Pound, since I have been a poet since the age of 16, I guess, and I saw Ezra Pound's influence on the Beats because I knew a bunch of the Beat Generation guys, and just talking about as a poet, he has some wonderful moments in all of his writing, but as a poet, generally speaking, he was not of the first echelon.
I read something where they said, of course he was a very talented poet in his own right, but they said probably where he excelled more than anything was helping to bring others up.
Well, exactly. I mean, without him there would be no T.S. Eliot, no James Joyce. And it's fantastic. And he liberated.
Didn't he influence Yeats?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Or he at least he gave Yeats, more of an audience.
Yeah.
I think he got his reciting style from Yeats, because he said, "Where's this kid from Idaho talking?"
Yeah, he did have kind of a strange, way of wording
what
that.
Thou lovest well do.
Yes.
Is
Yeah. With you, Surah.
Something the rest is dross. What thou lovest well shall not be. He's got a Scottish accent.
Yes.
He got it from Yeats's reading style, except he made it more Scottish, so he wouldn't just sound exactly like Yeats. That's my theory. But he helped the Beats and so many others. He broke ground. I mean, his translations of the Chinese classics, like the book of songs of the great collection of Chinese, basically folk songs, and which are one of the Confucian classics.
Yeah, I read somebody said that he of course he wasn't fluent in Chinese, but he had an almost intuitive ability to translate it.
Yeah, well, I mean, what he did outrageous things nobody else would do. I mean, we had translated Chinese folk song into Scottish dialect. I mean, what the hell is that? But he just said, that affected people. Says, wait, you don't have to be within this, Victorian or early modernist box here. You can, look what you can do. And many other people used his freedom in a much better way than he did. Although he has some beautiful, some of the cantos are magnificent, and I'm thinking of that translation of the Seafarer from Anglo-Saxon, just exquisite. But but then as a political theorist, he was pretty much a crank, And
have you ever read his? He had they're called the money pamphlets. Have you ever read these?
No,
it's pretty insightful at times. And
the things he said in Guide to Culture, Kulchur,
Yes.
culture.
Yes, culture.
That's his Idaho background coming through. Are very perceptive. I mean, a lot of them. Boy, I mean, if there's ever a guy that needs footnotes, but the footnotes would be about 10 times as long as his entire, rest of his works.
He just came to mind, and I had actually I wanted to ask you about him being a poet. But when you mentioned about the forces of Christ and Antichrist, one of my favorite quotes from him, I believe this was from one of his money pamphlets actually. He says, "We find two forces in history, one that divides, shatters, and kills, and one that contemplates the unity of the mystery. The arrow hath not two points. There is the force that falsifies, the force that destroys every clearly delineated symbol, dragging man into a maze of abstract arguments, destroying not one but every religion. But the images of the gods of Byzantine mosaics, or Byzantine mosaics, move the soul to contemplation and preserve the tradition of the undivided light."
This is beautiful. That is great.
I've kept this quote in my mind for over probably 12 years now.
Yeah.
I always think back to this. This was one of speaking of perennialism, this was probably the first glimpse, because I remember what he said, about the Byzantine gods, and I'm like, but wait, that's pagan. Or the Byzantine mosaics and the images of the gods, and I thought to myself, wait, but that's pagan. It can't be good, But the beauty, the spirit of what he's saying spoke to me.
That is an exquisite passage. I didn't know. I haven't heard that before.
Yeah, he has it's interesting. Like you said, he definitely had the crank side for sure. But he also had a kind of a very profound spiritual. Even though I don't think he was practicing a member of any religion as far as I know.
And perhaps it was not his swadharma to do that.
Right.
But I mean, when he calls his magnum opus the cantos, he's of course harking back to Dante. But Dante had an integrated worldview. He could take all this material from pagan sources and raise it to a higher level within the Christian framework and just do it exquisitely and perfectly. Whereas Ezra Pound, I'm thinking of one of the last lines of T.S. Eliot's The Canto, T.S. Eliot's of The Wasteland, where he says, "These fragments I've shored against my ruin." And that's the cantos. I mean, it's the plunder of all this destroyed Western civilization and a lot of other destroyed civilizations, and all that's left is cultural plunder, jewels pried out of their settings, that pirates got a hold of and heaped promiscuously together in a cave somewhere, and that's what his cantos were like.
Yeah.
I mean, magnificent debris from all over the world. And it's sad that that's all he could do, but that's what was going on. I mean, there needed to be an Ezra Pound, there needed to be a James Joyce. Yeats was more integrated. Yeats, he had some pretty hard stuff to integrate. I mean, Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. How could you get anything good out of that when your buddy's Aleister Crowley, or his rival actually was Aleister Crowley? But it's still, or a sort of a spurious, half-hearted attempt to resurrect Neoplatonic theurgy without quite knowing what you're doing, oh God.
Yeah,
New Age in the worst sense.
And I wonder because Guénon didn't really become more widely known until a bit later, and I wonder how much, because you had from Pound and these other guys were kind of grasping for something, and I wonder if speaking of metaphysics, one of the basic rules of metaphysics is never go into the coulda, woulda, shoulda. It's like Guénon said, everything that should happen will happen exactly when it's supposed to happen. But it makes you wonder, what if I guess because Guénon, he appeared right when he was supposed to appear. Yeah.
Well, I mean, but of all those people that we've named, Yeats is the one.
Really? Yeah.
I mean, wow. I mean, if there's ever, you know,
Was he the one that you quoted in your video about AI when you said where is the information, the knowledge that we've lost in information?
T.S. Eliot.
I'm sorry, Eliot. Yeah.
Yeah. Where is
the knowledge lost in information?
Where's the wisdom lost in knowledge? Where's the knowledge lost in information?
Yeah.
How clear.
Right.
I mean, and Eliot is. You know, I was mentored by the Beat Generation. Lou Welch is a Beat Generation poet, and their whole thing was, Eliot was their bête noire because, you know, he was erected as the great standard, and then they just, you know, they said, God, you know, because Eliot can become terribly dry and tedious sometimes, and yet he's exquisite and at the same time, you know, and so actually one of the Beat Generation poets was Michael McClure, a very interesting poet, San Francisco poet. So I knew him very slightly. He knew me enough to know my name and like this. But he was known for reciting his poetry to the caged lions at the Frithjof Zoo, you know, and you know, he did what I've realized finally was a satire of the wasteland, or at least in you know, a couple of lines. The wasteland starts, April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of a dead land, mixing memory and desire and all blah blah. And then it goes to Michael McClure, and he just says, "Grar, April." You know, so, but I mean, Pound said great things against usury. I mean, I know Muslims who love Pound because he wrote against, you know, usury.
He really, this is speaking of this sort of, you know, in modern civilization, one of the themes is sort of this unsustainable growth. And a lot of people, even a lot of people miss the big picture that usury was sort of the early stages of this.
Yeah.
And Pound had his finger on this so directly when I love how he used to stress the point where he said usury, the definition now has been changed to mean an excessive interest. But he said, no, he said it means any amount of interest.
Yeah.
And the religions, they knew this, and in Islam, especially with riba, the concept of riba, they know this. They say, because, you know, if you permit it, what happens is it works mathematically so that eventually the money lending class winds up cornering the economy. It's unavoidable.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah. Indeed, and you know, and even Marx was against that. He said, you know, what is the basis of value? Labor. You know. It's not.
Pound had something to say about that as well. Interestingly, he said he disagreed with that. He had one of his money pamphlets was called Gold and Labor, I think it was called. You know, kind of the two extremes. You know, the gold of the capitalists and the labor of the communists and Marxists. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the basis of value is the grace of God, is the free gift of all of the resources we need to labor, and all the human talents we need to make something of the resources. That's where the value comes from.
Yeah, and you know, knowing, understanding metaphysics, and they don't have much of an issue with this in the East, where, you know, they tell you, you know, everything's been given to you actually.
Yeah.
You know, it's all, even your talent was given to you.
Yeah.
And your strength, everything's been given to you.
There's no such thing as a self-made man.
Exactly, right. So they don't have an issue with this, whereas it, you know, in the way, well, you know, there was some luck, but I also put my own effort in it, and I'm a self-made man now.
Yeah, I know people who feel ashamed to inherit from their parents because they didn't make it themselves. You know, I think your sister.
She may, yeah.
She might, you know, because that was a whole story. We had to struggle against Jenny's mother's last husband, who was trying to steal the estate, you know, it was probably me that saved about $200,000 of it. And Jenny's sister got 100,000. I think she's just been blowing it on travel because she doesn't feel good because she didn't make it. Or James Wetmore. James Wetmore, the publisher of Sophia Perennis, who did this wonderful job of keeping René Guénon in print in English. I mean, what an achievement.
Sure, yeah.
But he inherited a lot, and then he blew it. Because he said, I'll get rich, I'll buy gold, but what he did is buy pictures of gold. Somebody was selling him, oh yeah, you have a title to a bunch of gold bars, which you will never see. Yeah. We got them somewhere, and it turned out to be a scam, and I have a feeling there's a tendency to be ashamed of being given something. I wrote something.
That happens a lot because we're all supposed to make it. I've made everything myself. I don't depend on anybody for what I have.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what do you mean you don't depend on anybody?
Yeah. Yeah. I love the Bhagavad Gita is beautiful in this regard because it kind of tells you it's all just the workings of the three gunas. Mm-hmm. That's it. Everything you think you're doing, it's just everything you see spinning around in front of you and you think you're moving it. It's all just it's the workings of the gunas.
And that's the standpoint which very correctly sees God as the witness, and the gunas, which are in another sense in Shaiva terms are Shakti. That's where action is.
The energies,
Or in the Abrahamic religions, you have the opposite, but it comes to the same thing. Mm-hmm. The only doer is God.
Yeah. Or if we dare point out, in the Orthodox Christian tradition, the essence and energies. They hate when you do that because they go, no, it's totally different. But the yang and the yin, it's right there for everyone to see. The active and the passive. You see this theme over and over and over again. The light and the dark. The duality. It's there for everyone to see. But they're like they try to wall off of theirs and say, no, ours is different. We're not talking about that stuff.
Well, the Orthodox don't like so much. It's actually Orthodox. It's incredible. There's so much, you can't talk about. It's really Orthodox.
Yeah.
And
So you spent some years going through Orthodoxy. How did we get to Orthodoxy? How did you get to Orthodoxy?
Well, I was talking to, I wanted to be a Christian, and I thought, the Orthodox Church was recommended as more traditional, and they are.
By the Schuon.
Yeah, they have a lot of good traditions. I just sometimes.
Yeah, they're pretty like my friend said about the klipot. It's a very hard klipot for certain, And I ask them when I'm presented with these type of guys, I say. Well, what came first? If they reject the metaphysical aspect, I say, okay, well, what came first, you or Orthodoxy? They say, well, Orthodox came first. I go, really? Is that? I said, examine your own internal process. I said, which appeared first, you or Orthodoxy? This is going back like Ramana Maharshi and Nisargadatta. I said, no, you were first. And then who confirms Orthodoxy to be true? I asked them, and they say, well, no, God did. I said, no, you did. Because you're the beginning and the end. It's Nisargadatta. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's along the lines of Ramana Maharshi. He would point very, very carefully point this out. He goes, if you examine your own experience, you were there before every perception, and you remain after every perception. And no matter how grand the perception, there are many grand perceptions. Even the perception that the West calls God. It's still a perception, and the witness, the Atman, is there before the perception, and it remains after the perception.
Indeed. So, but when did we find St. John Maximovich?
That was amazing. One of the reasons attracted me to Orthodoxy was we lived in the Bay Area, and we could go visit the relics of John Maximovich.
Oh, wow.
It was just wonderful to
have. What a powerful place that is.
Where are these contained?
In the cathedral, in the Roquefort Cathedral in San Francisco.
Is this, they have it's a different saint, maybe Saint John of San Francisco. No, Saint of San Francisco. Also.
Well, it's St. John Maximovich of Shanghai and San Francisco.
Okay, so he is who I'm thinking about. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was Russian, was he? Or?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
he came from Russia, yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Wow.
Yeah, he was an amazing guy. I mean, he was a wonder worker.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he would do miraculous healings. He was known to levitate during the liturgy from time to time. And, but he was a hierarch, you know, because he was the archbishop, like for 4 years only. But
still.
But you know, he got to that position, and also he was a fool for Christ,
Right.
which is the same thing in Sufism as the Malamatia. You know, people who do, you know, attract social obloquy so as to moderate the social ego, you know, annihilate their social ego. So he would. You know, he would be dressed in his episcopal robes and carrying a staff of office, but he'd walk around barefoot, you know. and he once in a while would do some outrageous stuff, which would get him in trouble.
Yeah.
But amazing guy. And he came to both of us the same day. I was hiking up on in the hills, and you were down in the library, and we both saw him. You found a book by him, and I somehow thought of him. I forget how it worked.
Wow.
And then, you know, so he just walked into our lives
Wow.
at the moment. So.
As we have a few minutes left, so I wanted to mention again. So you have the book. So it's almost set to be published, or it's in the works to be published?
Well, I would be very surprised if it wasn't published.
Okay.
And it's the way forward for perennialism after the Antinomianism of Frithjof Schuon. When it comes to Frithjof Schuon, I'm talking about, well, here are his wonderful achievements and the principles he brought forward, and they're so important for all time, but also for our time as well. And then, but you have to read, you can read him once and he will dazzle you because you've never seen anything like that in your life. And then you can go back again and read him a little more critically and see that there are certain contradictions, and which do not invalidate him. But I think the powers, you know, the principalities and powers, the rulers of the darkness of this world didn't like what he was up to, and they hit him. And there are a few places where they turned his doctrine in a very weird way.
And you know? That's it. This thought has never came to me before, but being though Guénon had to actually move to Egypt because of this situation, right? Similar situation, because he, from what I read, or he stated that he felt he was under attack.
Yeah.
And he didn't mean physically.
No.
He meant a psychic attack.
Oh, yes,
But yet Schuon was apparently oblivious to this side of...
I have heard similar stories about him, which he never tells. But somebody said that a dragon once appeared in his room and chased him around. I don't know. Rumor. 100% rumor, don't believe. But I think whether he was aware of it or not, I think that did happen. I mean, in his last published book, which is The Transfiguration of Man, his last prose book, he made a statement, well, Judas could not have been a fundamentally bad man. Oh, yeah? What did Jesus say? You know, one among you is a devil, and it would be better for him if he had never been born. Yeah. And who are you going to believe, Schuon or Jesus? Yeah. You know, so there are places where he kind of loses it. But, you know, the problem is those should not blind us to his amazing achievement in metaphysics and in understanding of religions. What they should do is get us to ask, how could those both coexist in the same man, and do they coexist in me? How does one deal with the darkness of the times, which impinge upon all of us so intensely, and yet hold to the truth? And where is the battle between those two, and how do we carry it on, you know, honorably and with clarity and with courage? And you know, and you see the struggle of Schuon, and you see that battle very clearly delineated. And you're going to miss that teaching from him if you just reject him as a false guru, which is not warranted by any means, or if you say, well, he is the final avatar, the Kalki avatar, everything he says is absolute truth. That's not going to help you either. Those are the easy ways out, but if you're going to see both, it's going to be a little tough. But you're going to learn a lot more.
You mentioned that Rama Coomaraswamy had a quote, something like, "The devil doesn't care what side of the horse you fall off of."
The devil doesn't care which side of the horse you fall off of. Yeah, that's applicable in so many different ways.
Yeah, it really is. I mentioned it to my wife, afterwards, and she was like, "Well, it's pretty profound." Yeah, it's so true.
So, that's what my book is going to be in terms of Schuon. But there's a whole bunch that isn't about Schuon. How close can Christianity and Islam get in terms of dialogue and theological parallelism without ever crossing the boundary between the two, which you really can't do? And, I have something on the parallels between certain elements of Sufism, and particularly the concept of the ma'rifah, or the gnosis of the nafs, of the self, which is the ego, but it's also beyond the ego, and the parallels between that and the Jnana Yoga, if you can call it that, of Rama and Maharshi. I've got that. That was published in actually the Mountain Path, which is the journal of Rama Maharshi's ashram in Tiruvannamalai.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there's different approaches, and then there's something about the covenants of the Prophet Muhammad with the Christians of the world, which that's my last excursion into, probably my last for real, into activism, because I also have a background in peace movement activism coming from the counterculture. And this was when my colleague, Dr. John Andrew Morrow, became a Muslim as a teenager, raised a Catholic. He's a métis, which is a Canadian French word for a half-breed, a lot of American Indian, tribal blood, but also, French and Irish. And the métis in Canada have a particular legal status, So he's coming from that world. And just as ISIS was coming up, his incredibly detailed and exhaustive scholarship into the covenants of the Prophet Muhammad with the Christians of his time.
Oh, wow.
In which were treaties he made with the various Christian groups in his area, and also some Jewish groups.
This is published as a book?
It's called, he's got a lot of books now, but the book that I was taking off from is the Covenants of the Prophet Muhammad with the Christians of the world. Okay. And he was discovering these, some of them.
Because I was aware of one treaty that I think they still have preserved in a monastery in, I believe it's in Egypt or somewhere in North Africa.
It's in St. Catherine's in the Sinai.
Yes.
Which is
yes.
Egypt.
Yes.
Yeah. That isn't actually the original. The original, the Ottoman Sultan came one time and said, well, really the original is so important, it should be with us in the Topkapi, but so it's an early facsimile.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there are similar treaties that were held by other ancient monasteries in Iraq and places like that, and he either he found these in libraries, or he might have traveled to some of these places himself, but he knows people who did travel, finding, this is the one to the Armenians, this is the one and he brought this literature together, fantastic literature. Wow. It's a third foundational pillar of Islam, I would say, outside of Quran and Hadith. I would go that far. But it was suppressed because these documents became the basis for the Ottoman Empire's policy toward religious minorities. And when the Ottoman Empire fell, they said, well, what's this? This is just a bunch of documents from a defunct bureaucracy. This, who cares about this stuff anymore? So it almost went into historical amnesia. It used to be universally known among all Muslim scholars, many Muslims, and many people in the West. People in the U.S. diplomatic corps used to have to study these covenants in order to deal with the Ottomans. So it was, but that was all forgotten. Well, he brought them forward in the time of ISIS. And they say, universally, it is the duty of every Muslim until the end of time to protect the Christians. And not to kill them or damage their buildings or onerously tax them or even prevent your Christian wives from going to church. And if a Christian church falls into disrepair, it's a pious act for the Muslims to help rebuild the church. And anyone who contravenes this, because this is my will, and these covenants were given to me under the inspiration of Allah, will earn the curse of God and his prophet.
Yeah.
And this is right when ISIS was doing that very thing. And we suspect that ISIS was going after and burning various monasteries, trying to find these documents and destroy them.
Now that you mentioned, I've noticed, I can't confirm it, but I've noticed I had a feeling in my dealings on the internet that part of this counter-initiative force is trying to prevent this, what you're speaking about. They're trying to prevent a common, I won't say even a common understanding between Christians and Muslims, because of course that's difficult.
And then come forward with a false understanding.
Yeah.
There's a false ecumenism that's trying to negate a true ecumenism. And so I call the true ecumenism united front ecumenism, where the religions will all realize that the world system, what do you call it, globalism, whatever, the rulers of the darkness of this world hate all the religions and wish their destruction. And so the religions are natural allies. And forget about trying to make a syncretistic, amalgam of doctrines, that there's no time for that, and it's not worth it anymore.
This is what I say. Basically, we're going to be forced to circle the wagons with each other. I say, like, the Antichrist, Dajjal, is going to force us to, whether you want to or not. And I tell the Orthodox guys, the militant guys, I say, you guys, I say, you're going to be arguing with your cellmate about theology. I said, the Antichrist is going to, when that day comes,
very well said.
You guys are going to be you're going to be on death row with the Muslim or the Catholic or the evangelical, and you're going to be looking at him saying, you guys are the reason we're in all this. You're the reason we're here.
Yeah. So this from about 2013 to about 2019-20, we were the Covenants Initiative, and we started a peace movement within the Muslim world. Interfaith peace movement, but we got letters of support from the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople, from the Greek Patriarch of Jerusalem, and both the Saudis and the Iranians were bidding for Dr. Morrow to get them in their stable. Wow. And he just said, I don't want to get involved in this. He got on the website of Ayatollah Khamenei, about this. And what we finally did is we were able, through the use of these documents, to get one Christian woman out of prison who had been in prison for 7 years under threat of capital punishment because she'd said something, some Muslim women at the well, as I see in my mind's eye, sort of dissed her, Christian, and she said, what's your prophet ever done? My, the person who started my religion was the Son of God. And that's in Pakistan. That's capital offense. So it went back and forth through the courts for 7 years, and finally, Imran Khan, when he was the premier, it is the premier, right, or is it the prime minister? I think it's premier. Forget the title of Pakistan. Was citing these documents. And finally, this is Ashia Bibi, who was that woman, was finally released.
Wow.
And the Supreme Court of Pakistan cited these documents and cited Dr. Morrow's research in their decision as to why to release it. So, boy, we really, And then, of course, that didn't last, and then the jihadists essentially took over Pakistan, and now Imran Khan is in prison himself, but and it worked because this was the will of a real prophet that had been suppressed, and we could go to it, and for that short time, everything worked because we felt the will of God behind us. And of course, the will of God, still there's time, the will of God, for a particular time is for that time.
But I have a good friend who's from Syria, and I actually wanted to do a video. He's Christian, and I wanted to do a video with him because he's very sympathetic towards Islam, even though he's from Syria, he's from a majority Muslim country. And the narrative that we get from the West is the Syria is majority Muslim and the Christian minority is persecuted, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there are some Syrian Christians who do feel that way, which is interesting because my church is Middle Eastern, so you have this sort of interesting mix of the ones there who are very sort of I'd say maybe three types. You have the ones who are very sympathetic towards Islam, you have the ones who are sort of just pragmatic towards it, and then you have the ones who are just hostile towards it. You have a variety of them, right? But my friend, he's very sympathetic to, he actually holds Perennialism himself. He's very sympathetic towards Islam. And I told him, I said, I want to make a video with you because I want to talk about what it's like being a Christian in the Middle East and, sort of how Christians and Muslims can come to a more of a common understanding. And he told me, he said that making it, even though he lives in the U.S., he doesn't live in the area. He said that making a video like that would be dangerous for me. And I couldn't understand what he was saying. I said, but wait, wouldn't it be the opposite? I said, wouldn't that be and he said, you don't understand how things work. He said, in the Middle East, he said, there are forces in the Middle East that don't want Christians and Muslims to come together.
Of course.
Of course.
And, those forces sometimes get patronage from the West, too. I mean, ISIS was, although it drew upon a lot of, Wahhabi-oriented or Salafi-oriented believers, it was essentially created by Israel, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and
the UK, Britain,
and the United States, and some other Western nations.
Yeah.
We need this army in order to counter Russia and Syria.
Mm-hmm.
That was the thing, and so the international mercenary pool was drawn upon. I always think of, if you're a mercenary, you have this big wardrobe and you have different costumes, you have a jalaba if you're going to be a Muslim terrorist, you have something else.
And it's amazing how many mercenaries there are in the world. It's kind of amazing how people will kill and fight wars for money. It's pretty amazing.
And so, actually there was during the wars in Syria around those times, apparently the Allied, forces under the United States, there were some ISIS fighters they let go through their lines.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, my friend who's from Syria, he has, us in the conspiracy community in the West, we have these. He has some real scoop on what went on there, and he told me that stuff went on that was a complete from the Western narrative perspective, was a complete anomaly.
Yeah.
Like he said, for example, he said there was a fortress in the middle of the Christian, it was like one of the most Christian areas in Syria. There was a fortress there that was occupied by one of these guys, the Free Syrian Army, these clans. He said there was nobody supplying them. He said the entire area was hostile to them, and yet they were able to stay holed up in this fortress for years. So he said, who was supplying them? He said, we were. And he said, we weren't supporting them. So he said, who was? So there was somebody from the outside.
Yeah, definitely. And so I think, we let through we provided the leadership of ISIS. And then they donning their Muslim garb, recruited, from the Salafi populace that thought they were fighting for Islam.
Yeah. So something else he told me that was kind of worrisome but kind of expected. He said I can't tell you exactly how. He said, but the Russians and the Americans were both in Syria at the same time, right? He goes somehow he said, yeah, he said, superficially they appeared to be against each other. He goes, somehow at the top they were working together. He said, we know that somehow at the top they were working together. So
yeah, I mean, and that's what you have in spy groups, you know. I mean, that there's more collaboration or deals between opposing, intelligence. I mean, there was evidence that there are some forces in Syria who were supported by the Pentagon, others who were supported by the CIA, who were actually fighting each other.
Yeah.
So
I'm assuming this isn't being recorded.
I can clip it out.
Well, keep it in if
it's all right.
I've written about it.
Yeah, I don't think we haven't. People have gone much more into detail on this on the internet. That's for sure. This is pretty superficial.
But what we found is around, when ISIS was murdering Christians, there were, in many places in the world, Muslims who would spontaneously come forward to protect the Christians.
Oh yeah, well I think Hezbollah actually was.
Hezbollah was one, but there were others like in Paris, and there were some Muslims who were actually martyred by ISIS because they were protecting Christians, and no one. This is completely suppressed.
Yeah.
I've got a bunch of links to, I don't know how many are still active, to different articles about that on my website, where it says Muslims protecting Christians around the world.
I've seen it. Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah,
you have
so
it.
What's interesting, and that is entirely in the spirit of the covenants.
Yeah,
but those people may never have heard of the covenants.
Yeah, my Syrian friend. That's another thing he told me. I told him. I said, how do you respond to people who say, Muslims, say this and that against you? I said, how would you respond to them? And he said, he's speaking as a Syrian in the middle of, Islamic Damascus or whatever. And he goes, ignore what they say and pay attention to what they do.
Oh yes.
He said they're gonna say blah blah blah. Jesus was just a prophet. He said they're gonna say all that to you. He said, but via their acts they'll show you kindness. So.
Yeah, well, and that is essentially the practice. That's the practice of the prophet. And so you don't know. I mean, certainly the Quran denies, far be it from God to take to himself a son. This is a great blasphemy. But of course, the Christians don't teach that God took to himself a son. That's the heresy of adoptionism. Okay, in Christian terms, or far be it from those that say God is the third of three. Okay, but Christian Trinitarianism does not say God is the third of three.
Yeah, and also they say that Jesus didn't die, which as Christians we don't believe he died actually.
Well, yeah, I mean it's exactly.
But they when you read it with a very hard little saying, well Christ, but he's not dead like our ancestors are dead. He didn't die.
Yeah.
Our ancestors are dead.
Or it's like the Quran is very concise and abbreviated, and it's if he took the crucifixion, the resurrection, and the ascension, and put it together.
Exactly. Right.
And to say, he did not die. The Jews tried to get rid of him and tried to kill him, but they failed, and God took it.
And how brilliant, the sacred scriptures have such depth to them that it gives the Muslim exclusivists sort of plausible deniability, in order to say, no, we have the exclusive truth here, but if you interpret it at different levels, you can extrapolate out the broader meaning.
Yeah, and the Prophet Muhammad, the story is now the story of him granting that covenant to the St. Catherine's Monastery, which is the proto-covenant called the Ashtiname, and it's told by the monks of that monastery, and it's also told by the Bedouins, surrounding Bedouins. But it doesn't find much of a place in Christian sources, although the covenants later appear. I mean, in Muslim sources outside of that, but the covenants certainly later appear in Muslim history. But the story that's told by the Bedouins and the monks in Sinai is that before the Quran descended upon the prophet, before his prophethood came to him, he was a caravan leader, and we know that. He was a businessman who worked, essentially, his first wife, Khadija, was, you know, basically a rich merchant woman, and he would run caravans to many of the places, you know, in the Near East, you know, surrounding Arabia, and one of the caravans would supply that monastery, and I don't know what they got from the monastery in return, but somehow there was trading with the monastery, and so he went there, and he was at one point like resting in the shade of a wall, you know, from the sun, and above him, and an eagle was hovering, and a monk came out and said, what is this? The eagle was just hovering right above him, and he said, this is significant. And so he went in to talk to his fellow monks, and they talked about this, and they looked at this. And so they called Muhammad in and said, we would ask you to grant to us a document or a promise or a treaty of protection. And he said, well, who am I to do that? I'm just a caravan leader. I can't protect anybody from... And the monks would say, we see great things for you in the future. And this is one of the many stories, or the several stories of Christian monks, one in Syria, Bahira, I think his name was, who would recognize...
That's probably, I think, the most well-known one, right?
Yeah, would recognize, you know, the prophethood, the potential.
I think this is the story where they saw him as he was a younger man, I think a teenager even, and he was coming through the caravan, and the monk, they pointed him out, and they said, this is a prophet here. They pointed at him.
So there's another story of that coming from St. Catherine's. And so he said, okay, well, whatever. And, you know, went in and they got some ink, and he put a handprint on this page. I guess they'd written a few lines. This is what we're saying here, and he must have trusted them, because apparently he could not read at that point. And that was the origin of the Ashtanami, which later was expanded and with different provisions, and it was signed by a number, you know, it may have been scribed by Ali, and it was signed by a number of the Prophet's companions, future caliphs, and all this. And that was the beginning of the whole literature of the covenants, which Dr. Morrow almost single-handedly has rediscovered, which is so important for our time.
Definitely, yeah.
So that's a little chapter in my books. In other words, it's not all about Schuon.
Okay, good. So you give us a...
Yeah, just a quick overview of that.
And also, so with respect to your books, I know they're on Amazon, right? Can we purchase off your website as well, or directly?
No,
okay,
it's just Amazon.
Okay, because sometimes the people, you know, to avoid giving Amazon a cut, etc.
There's a little more computer savvy. I'd probably do that.
Actually, I'll see. Yeah, I know somebody, but I'll see if I can maybe set something like that up. But okay, you're good. So I can't recommend these two. I know it's very dark. I don't have any professional lighting here, but the Vectors of the Counter-Initiation and the System of Antichrist.
Those are my two dark books.
Yeah.
There's some happier books than that.
I mean, so relevant now, you know, years later. You know, reading the Vectors, I was just like, I was shaking my head up, like, I can't believe how relevant this is now. I'm like this, and so I guess as for now, like I said, I guess we're in the intermission of the movie now. I guess I suspect that Trump is going to come back next year, and then we'll probably see all hell break loose again.
If he isn't assassinated or something.
Yeah, God forbid. I mean, the future doesn't look. I mean, you know, I don't mean regardless of who's elected. I think the future doesn't look good. You know,
with the Covenants Initiative, we had a little moment with Trump because through the help of Dr. Sayyid Hossein Nazare, he put us in touch with an Iranian-American billionaire, whose name I won't give you, you know, who is going to be the angel of our movement. Right. And I actually wrote a paper called War on Five Fronts, a comprehensive plan to defeat ISIS. And Dr. Morrow wrote part of it as well. And we handed it to him, and he said, and he was going to meet with Trump. And because he knew a Jewish billionaire in the Billionaires Club who knew Trump, and so he was going, and apparently he at least met with Trump's team. And we handed it to him and said, you want to show this to them? I don't know if he ever did, because I didn't have the courage to ask him if he actually did. But that was his plan.
Okay.
And my thought was, well, Trump needs to see a plan to defeat ISIS coming from Muslims, because that's the best I can imagine to offset any tendencies he might have to do an anti-Muslim pogrom in the U.S.
But knowing what we know about worldly affairs, at the end of the day, his subjective intentions are probably, like you mentioned this when we last spoke on the video, their subjective intentions are not even that important, probably, at the end of the day. When especially now, considering how indebted he is to the people who are helping him out of his current mess, he's going to be.
And even the first time around, he didn't come in with an agenda of his own. There were a bunch of agendas, bouncing around, and he just chose some of the ones that he'd rather go with.
Yeah,
and that's all he could do.
Right. So, well, on that note, I guess let's wrap it up. And I say I highly recommend these two books, to pick these two books up. And then we'll keep an eye out for your next one. We don't have the date yet, but I can always add it in the description of the video later. So when you get it, excellent. I thank you so much for meeting with me. I know it was, you were unsure about, how things would turn out, but I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity. It's really pretty remarkable, to have a discussion like this in person. I know you've met with other perennialist characters. For me, I'm coming, from a pretty ordinary world. So, thank you very much.